Okay, we might kick off if that's okay. We're still down a few people, but they can trickle in as they arrive. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and in particular to their deep connection to the land, water and natural environment of this area. My name's Donna Marshall. I'm the Head of Community Engagement at Air Services, and I'm your host for today. We do have a few of our people joining us online today. Unfortunately, that's due to this wonderful COVID thing that we're all hopefully emerging from. The people that have actually done the work, the technical work on the post-implementation review are actually based in Melbourne, and they're not allowed into your fine state at the moment, so they're going to join us online. I'm actually from Brisbane, so I'm allowed to come down here, and my colleague Beth, who's part of the community engagement team, she's also from Brisbane, so was allowed in. I'm hoping we'll be allowed back. And Anthony is also here from our operations area. He's a local, so he was obviously allowed in as well. Joining us online, we have Tim, who is from our community engagement team, and he's led the work on the post-implementation review. Also online, we have Nigel, who's one of our flight path designers, and he's done a lot of the technical review, obviously. And then we also have Mark, who is our noise specialist. So he's done the review of the environmental assessment modelling against the actual, plus has had a look at the various alternatives in terms of potential noise implications and so forth. So we've got the three of them online. The bulk of the presentation today will be led by them. I'm basically here, I'll be roving around with a microphone, so if you have questions, you'll be able to ask those, and our team online will be able to answer them. Just in relation to that, so I'll hold the microphone, please don't take it off me. That's not because I'm a control freak, that could be, but it's actually just COVID safety. We don't want too many people handling that microphone. The session today is being recorded. There's a camera over in that direction, so it does actually record the audience here. So can I just check that is there anybody who's got any concerns about being on camera at all? Okay, Sharon's recording as well. The recording of this session will be put online on our Engage page after the session. It usually takes us a couple of days to download it and get it put up, but that will be put up online as well as our presentation, so there's no need to scribble furiously. Everything that we say here and show you today will be put online for you to access later. We are also live streaming, and that's again is another important thing for the microphone. If you speak without the microphone, people listening online can't hear you, so please wait for the microphone to be brought to you so that they can hear what you've said. When people do sort of speak without the microphone, I try to paraphrase, but I usually do a terrible job of it, so I'd rather people hear your words rather than my translation of them. Also joining us online, just for your awareness, we have a representative of the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman's office, so they're just observing the meeting today to see how it goes, and they'll give us feedback, good, bad or otherwise on that. Housekeeping, the bathrooms are just outside the door. Gentlemen, you have about 5 paces to get to the bathroom. Ladies, I suggest you plan it a little better than that, because you've got to go down the corridor, hang a left and then hang a right. I have turned the lights on, so hopefully you'll be able to find that quite easily, but it's a little bit further to walk. I think that's all I had to... Yes, that's all I had to say in terms of the housekeeping. Now I'm just going to switch to a roving microphone so that I can move around a bit. Okay. Hello. Okay, we've got me. All right, so if we could go to the second slide, whoever's controlling the magic slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so about Air Services. So Air Services Australia, who I know you're all very familiar with and probably have very strong views about, we are an air navigation service provider. We control 11% of the world's airspace. That includes Australia's sovereign airspace, but also some of the area around the Pacific Islands and so forth. Our primary role is air navigation, so we provide air traffic control services at towered airports. We also design flight paths to connect airport runways to other airport runways, and we do firefighting and rescue services. They're our primary role. As you've probably heard in previous meetings, we're not a regulator. We have no powers to enforce aircraft to fly in a particular way. We design the flight paths and the instrument flight procedures that airline pilots then follow. Noise abatement procedures and so forth, we can't enforce from a compliance perspective, but we do engage with our airline customers if we see that noise abatement procedures aren't being followed, and we try to understand, is there a reason they're not being followed? Do we need to do something to get better application of those? But we can't actually enforce any of that. We have facilities all around the country. Obviously, we have a number of towered airports, but we also look after air services even into uncontrolled airports, so the flight paths and so forth. And importantly, we manage noise impacts across the country. So any noise complaints or issues with operations, they come through us to look at if there's any improvements we can make. CASA is the regulator, so the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. They are the regulator with enforcement powers, but their focus is obviously safety. Air Services' number one priority is also safety. Safety will always be our number one priority, but what we try to do with our flight path design now is that we try to minimise the impact on communities. This PIR process is something that we do 12 months after we implement a flight path change. The reason we do it is that when we design a flight path change, we model what we believe will happen. So we look at what the change is and what we actually believe the noise impacts will be, how we believe it will operate, and we allow a 12-month period of operations, and then we do a review. And that review is to confirm if what we expected would happen has actually happened. Is the noise as we expected? Are the operations happening as we expected? And are there some improvements that we can make to that? So at the moment, we're doing post-implementation reviews here in Hobart, and you're kind of at the latter part of the post-implementation review. We're also doing one at the moment for Sunshine Coast in Queensland. They had a new runway that opened in June last year, so we're doing our post-implementation review of that, and they're at the point where they're about to start providing us with suggested alternatives. And we've just recently commenced a post-implementation review in Brisbane. They had a new runway open in July 2020, and so we're now commencing the review. So in Brisbane, we're in the process of engaging on the terms of reference. So this is part of our normal process to go through and do these reviews. I'm not going to go through the scope. You would have all been part of the terms of reference, and so there's no need for us to jump back into that. So next slide, please. So as I said, we're kind of nearing the completion of this post-implementation review. What we're wanting to get out of today is we've obviously produced the report on the post-implementation review. We're going to go through the key highlights from that, answer your questions. You then have an opportunity to give us feedback on it. So if you think something's not explained well, if you think our decision isn't correct and you don't believe that what we've said is right, then you can put a submission to us and we'll update the report to provide more clarity. If there's something you think we've missed, we'll go and have a look at that, and we'll then finalise the report after that. So the whole reason for this meeting, I guess, is to give you the opportunity to ask those questions that after having a flick through the report you're wanting further information on, and to tell us to challenge us if you think that we haven't got something right. Importantly, and the team will take you through this shortly, but with the suggested alternatives that we've said are safe and feasible that we're going to take through to further investigation, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of them will be implemented. They could be, they might not be. What we do after this phase is that we complete the post-implementation review. The options that were deemed safe and feasible go into our normal flight path change program. So they'll be designed properly by our flight path designers, they'll be environmentally assessed, and then we'll come back out and do some engagement on them. And that engagement will be really important because that's when we'll have the detail on what the altitudes will be, what the exact noise impacts will be, what that change will look like, and we'll engage with you on that. And then the ones that get through that process will be implemented. So I know there's, some of the alternatives that we've said are safe and feasible could be things that some people in this room are not supportive of, and that's fine. That's what we'll talk to you about as we go through that flight path change program. So the fact that they've got through this post-implementation review process doesn't necessarily mean that they're done and dusted. Next slide. Yep, 1 second, I'll just bring the microphone to you.
Just a question about timeline between now and potentially something being implemented. Can you give us an idea of how long that may be?
Okay, so I think there's the changes that have been suggested to noise abatement procedures, they can be implemented much more quickly because there's not as much work in those. Where it's a flight path change, normally it will take around between 6 and 12 months to implement. That's because we've got to do design. The design will take us a couple of months. The environmental assessment's usually a couple of months. Community engagement is a couple of months, and then we have to submit it to CASA for them to approve. They've got to do their safety review of it. So it can be like a 6 to 12 month process to implement the actual change. So the comment from the floor was that doesn't seem long enough to me. They can take longer if they're more complicated, but that's generally, because we've done a review and we're trying to make improvements, we do try to fast track them where we can. Obviously, the way we work in terms of our flight path change program is we have to act on a prioritisation basis because we look after, as I said, 11% of the world's airspace. Anything that's a safety requirement, we always do first. But where we've done a post-implementation review and we're trying to implement improvements for the community, we do try to prioritise them and get them through as quickly as we can. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to somebody who's much smarter than I am with aircraft operations, and they'll take you through the rest of the presentation. So if you have a question as we go through this, please just raise your hand. I'll ask the presenter just to halt for a moment and I'll bring the microphone over to you so that you can ask your question and get your response. So over to you, team.
Thanks, Donna. And I'd like to add my welcome to everyone who's come. If you've travelled far today, thank you. We, value your participation and contribution. We were going to travel quite far, but unfortunately can't be with you. So it is a little harder for us doing this on the internet and over the web rather than being there. So please bear with us, but we'll do our very best and wish that we could be there with you actually in person. All right, a little bit of signposting for everyone. We've put this slide up here. We're no doubt many of you are very familiar with the airspace structure in Hobart. We've done this just so that when we're getting feedback from everyone in the community or from industry, we're all on the same page, so we can call them the same thing, and it'll really help us with your feedback. If you're saying I've got an issue with a particular flight path, then we can pull that out and identify it. So I won't dwell on this, but this is a really good way to reference your feedback if and when you do that. So thanks. Next slide, please. Cool. Okay, so this section of the presentation, we're just going to touch on briefly the environment assessment component. And as you will all no doubt be aware, we need to validate what we predicted was going to happen with what actually did happen. That's why we went in and did noise monitoring and looked at the flight tracks and the radar data, etc. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but if you do have any questions, please do feel free to jump in and we'll take those on. But I'm just going to quickly go through some of those key things, and then we've also got Mark who's online with us who can answer any detailed questions if needs be. So the key findings of the PIR were that we correctly identified where the impacts were going to occur for the communities and looked at those areas correctly. When we did the modelling in the original EA, we selected a 90th percentile day. So we were looking for a very busy day in the winter and the summer period. And the reason why we did that is because we were looking for a day that was representative of the seasonal variations, but also that had sufficient traffic. So when you model what the changes are going to be and how that's going to impact the community, that you're picking a day that's pretty busy, so the 330th busiest day in the year. And what we did is we had a look and picked out one day in summer and one day in winter. When we went back and did that, we looked at a busy day which had around 75 movements overall, and in the PIR, even with COVID impacts, we've seen around 66 movements per day. So those are within 10% of each other, which is a good sign of the recovery. And as you'll all be aware, we're starting to see more recovery coming now. Another key takeout from this PIR was that we didn't see some of those changes that COVID brought about, like airlines putting much more emphasis on fuel efficiency and also changing the aircraft types that they're flying to and from Hobart as a result of the COVID impacts. So one of the things that we saw was that there were smaller jets being flown, so not as many seats, and that allowed the airlines to keep that route viable. What this meant was that we saw a lot more 717-200s being flown than we originally predicted. So in the past, where we would have thought or anticipated seeing more A320s and 738s, we're seeing more 717-200s. And that's had an impact on the noise modelling as well. And then the other thing that we've seen is that there's been lots more use of some of those routes over Primrose Sands, Carlton River, which are a bit shorter in terms of track miles to get to the runway. And that's been taken up by the airlines with two main approaches. One with better equipment on board the aircraft, the RMPAR, being used a lot more, and then also the fixed visual segment, which is when the conditions are good and they allow us to do that, we can allow the aircraft to take the shorter route. So this has overall meant that we've seen much higher levels of traffic over those areas in Primrose Sands that we just talked about. Overall, the picture is that we're seeing aircraft are actually following the SIDS and stars. And for those of you who are not familiar, they're the roads in the sky that connect from the upper airspace to the runways. And the SIDS are the standard instrument departures, and those are the roads that leave the airport, and the stars are the standard arrival routes, and those ones are the ones that connect. So when we're talking about that, if you're ever confused, just stop us and we'll explain a little bit more. And then the other thing is that we're seeing that the aircraft, when we do the noise modelling, we have to make an assumption about how high the planes are going to be. And that's driven by factors like how far do we think the plane's going to travel, so how will it climb, or what's the approach angle when it's coming in, which is generally 3 degrees on the approach. So we saw that aircraft are broadly within those parameters. One of the learnings that we took from this is that there were differences in what we thought were going to happen with some of the runway allocations and the use of traffic across the day. And that's driven primarily by some of those COVID impacts that we couldn't have seen coming around the corner. But it's also driven by the fact that we looked at one day in summer and one day in winter. Now, as I mentioned before, those are days that are indicative of the seasonal variations that we would expect to see in Hobart. But what we've decided to do is looking forward, and in our PIR modelling to look at the impacts now, we're looking at a 90th percentile week. So that's looking at a very busy week and then saying, okay, how did the traffic get allocated to the runways across that entire week? So that's one of the learnings that we've taken from this, which will allow us to get even better at making our assumptions as good as possible. And it's probably worth calling out that with modelling, even with all the best intent in the world, things change, and as they do, we don't always get those assumptions absolutely right. And I think the key message is here, we're doing our very best to get them as right as we can within the context of modelling. And so that's what we've been trying to do here. Okay, next slide, please, Nigel. Cool, thank you. So overall, I might throw to my colleague Mark if needs be, or if there's questions at the end of this, but we saw that overall there was a bit of a mix between what we thought we would see with the short-term monitoring. As a reminder, we do short-term noise monitoring to make sure that what we predicted in the modelling actually came out in the real world. And there's several factors in the real world that may change, how the model predicts things were going to go. And so that's really what we do, is we go in and we make sure that what we predicted is actually happening, and then that allows us to improve our modelling for the future, but also understand what was really happening in situ. So overall, we saw that the 60 dB noise levels were slightly higher in some of those areas where we had higher traffic levels, which shouldn't surprise anyone, and then lower than estimated in some of the other areas like Richmond to the north, where we didn't see as much traffic as we thought we were going to see. And then I touched on it before, some of the ways that the runways were used and allocated or which are driven by weather and other safety factors didn't quite go the way we thought. There was a bit of a difference between what we thought was going to happen on runway 30 in winter. And again, that's partly to some of those weather impacts, but also picking a single representative day rather than looking at a representative week. So that's why that's really important. On the 70 dB front, we recorded that there were events that occurred there. Now, some of these impacts were not predicted in the original EA to hit land and to make landfall. Unfortunately, that change in the fleet mix, the use of routes that were much closer to the airport and therefore lower, did result in the noise being slightly higher. And the other thing that we noticed as well is that we had a look at the top noise events in the actual noise modelling, and then we listened to the recordings to see if there were explanations that we could find for why we were seeing some of those events. And in a lot of those recordings, I think from the top 10, we saw 6 or 7 of those actually had other sources of noise in them at the same time. So, for example, a loud tractor, loud cars and other community events that were feeding in. So there was an aircraft passing over at the time, but there was also other significant events that were community-based happening at the same time. So we did do those checks and balances.
Okay, Tim, I just have a question here from the floor. Just one moment.
Thanks, Donna.
Just asking about the noise modelling and the numbers. I don't think those other sounds make a difference. It's not a cumulative effect based on, it's a tractor and a boat and a car and that stuff. It's just the level. So to get to that level over 60 decibels, the reason it's got to there is because the plane's flying over, not because of a tractor or anything like that. That's just incorrect.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch
Tim,
your name. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Sorry,
Daniel. Sorry,
hi,
Tim.
Daniel.
I didn't ask people to give their name. That's why you didn't give one. Sorry, Tim.
Oh, apologies. So I just wanted to sort of then elaborate a little bit on that, and I think Mark can probably join in as well. When you've got a recording taking place and the recording switches on as the aircraft comes over and it senses a noise event, if there are other events happening that are actually adding to that cumulative noise that are higher than the event occurring overhead, then those will raise the total recording level that we get on the meter. So it's really important, if there was a foghorn going off at the same time as the recording had switched on to say there's a plane here, then that's going to show up as a much higher level if that other community event is significantly higher than the event we're recording.
Okay, I've just got another question. Tim, one moment. If you could say your first name so Tim knows who he's talking to, that'd be great.
Cool. Hi, Tim. It's Dave here. Just a question on the noise monitoring. I'm just wondering how sophisticated it is in terms of being able to pick out the different frequencies of the noise, because obviously, an aviation turbine has a particular noise signature, which is quite different to a chainsaw or a foghorn or, a community event. So it'd be good to know. I mean, it's a pretty important metric you're measuring, and I'd like to know how you can filter out those kind of background noises, because it's quite common in, optics. You filter out frequencies of stray light for particular optical applications, and it would be the same for noise. So it'd be good to get your explanation on that, please.
Yeah, okay. I'll give it a good try, and then I'll hand over to. Actually, I might give it straight to Mark.
Yeah, maybe let Mark. Mark can explain that one.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. You are right. The noise monitors are picking up all the frequencies, and some of the props and whatnot have a pretty distinct kind of tonal value. It is difficult when we're looking at the metric of LA max, is which we have for all of our criteria. We don't specifically filter out any of those frequencies. We have the maximum. So, but the way it works is that the monitors are quite sophisticated, and the noise event has to reach a certain kind of pattern that matches an aircraft flying over the top. So the noise level has to rise in a particular way, reach over a threshold, and fall back down. So we find that that's the best way we can kind of collect our measurements at the moment. And we use EnviroSuite, EVS, to do our noise monitoring for us. They're world leading in this field and monitor aircraft noise all around the world. So they're using great methods to capture the aircraft noise.
So I think if I could just give a real world example of that, and we'll take a couple of other questions on this. We had a similar incident in Brisbane where we saw a noise monitor spike to, I think it was above 80 decibels, and we thought that was a bit odd as an aircraft went over. And so what we do is we go back and listen to those recordings, as Tim said before, and what we found when we listened to the recording was that there must have been a pelican sitting right near the noise monitor, and the aircraft may have spooked it, but it squawked at the time the plane went over, and that's what we actually heard in the recording. And so that's what the spike actually was this pelican. But we do have to go back and listen. There was still a plane going over at the time, but we go back and listen where we see those, what we would think is an abnormal spike, or the top 10, as Tim said, of the top 10 noise events. We go back and listen just to understand, if it is actually just aircraft noise. Did you have a... I'll do one here and then I've got one down the back. So this is Daniel again, Tim.
Yeah, I'm not convinced those results you got there are correct, because I've had a look at that noise stations, and pretty much every flight that went over Connolly's Marsh and Primrose was over 60 decibels, so I don't see how those figures reflect that. The other thing I'd like to point out is that this is an obvious indication of the difference between noise reflectance over water and over inland. So Richmond's gone lower, where these places over water are actually showing a higher indication of noise, and that's what happens all the time, and you just don't seem to get that when you do your modelling. So I just want to make that point, that it's much louder in open areas with water reflectance than it is in inland and residential areas.
So Mark, is there anything you can add to that? Is there anything in our modelling that we use to look at those sorts of, I guess, topographical variances?
The modelling enables you to put in terrain information. It doesn't specifically enable me to put in bodies of water that may reflect noise levels in those areas. It's something we'd have to look into to try to improve the results that we get.
Okay, and we've just got another question here. Just don't touch the microphone.
Yeah, g'day, it's David here. Look, I'll just make 2 comments on this as well. Obviously, the whole point of doing a noise monitoring is to determine the impact of the flights, and the impact is not just a function of the volume. It's actually, firstly, the type of noise. So, for example, rain on the roof may be more than 60, 70 decibels, but that's a very different type of noise to a jet aircraft flying over your house. And the second thing is relative noise, which is something the ANO flagged in her first report on the Hobart flight path changes. It's a very different sort of scenario if you live in a quiet area where there's very few noise events, and then suddenly you're getting 60, 70 decibels, compared to if you live in a city or a busy suburb. That has a much higher impact on you, and this type of monitoring really doesn't reflect that. So in my view, I don't really think this captures the impact on people. It's purely just a measurement of volume. So I'd make those comments, and I do think that's something in this PIR and going forward you guys should be considering, because as I say, I mean, if you were purely basing it on noise volume, I don't think that's really capturing impact. Okay, I think we'll we can take that one definitely on board. I guess that when we do these reviews as part of the post-implementation review, the primary purpose of us doing the comparison of environmental assessment against actual is to understand if what we thought the noise levels would be is reflected in the actual. But I guess it's more our environmental assessment that picks up the frequency and the human impact. But you make a good point. Maybe that's something that we can look at moving forward, is how we better extrapolate that out to the actual as well, because we tend to look at frequency and number of people affected when we do our initial assessment. It might be something that we could take forward into future PIRs to look at that
in retrospect as well. Sorry? Did somebody speak then? No? Okay. Okay, so the comment for people online was that in 2017 that was a comment that was made. So yep, I'll take that on notice, and we'll look at that as part of our updating of the report on this. Just another question here, guys.
Yeah, my name's John. Did I just hear earlier that your noise model has no variable input for water terrain? Is that correct?
Mark?
Yeah, that would be correct. Yeah.
Okay, just a follow-on question from that, Mark.
Yeah, it's John again. That means all your numbers are flawed, doesn't it?
So I guess with our modelling, we can only use the tools that are available. Mark, is that something are you aware of a tool that allows us to plug in that water effect, the reflective effect of water, or is that something we'd need to see if there's something available to do that with?
Yeah, that would just have to be something we look into to whether we can maybe change the terrain model to look at areas where it's more reflective than others. Maybe change its absorption or something. Yeah, but the base product in itself won't enable that directly.
Okay, so that's something we can take up as well as a result of this PIR to see if we can find something that does that. Our current tools don't allow us to do that.
I think Tim here, just want to add something to what Mark said. Part of what we've done in this PIR is we've taken the temporary noise monitoring, which takes the actual noise environment and measures it, and then we've taken that information and used it to create a better model that reflects the noise that we're seeing in the actual environment. So the results of the PIR noise modelling are calibrated and reflect the actual real-world environment. So although the original model that we did in the EA doesn't pick up that difference, the actual PIR model takes the noise that we've experienced on the ground and matches that with what we're modelling. And that's what the team have gone to great lengths to achieve. I don't know if you want to just add anything else that I haven't captured there, Mark, but it's really important for people to understand that the original model has actually been calibrated and adjusted for the real world environment, and then the new model, the PIR model, takes some of that into account, regardless of how we got there.
Can I just ask then, Tim, does that real world modelling that we've done for the PIR address the previous comment about it not just being about noise levels, about it having to look at the frequency and extent of impact of the areas overflown? Does that address that point, or do we still need to do some more work to understand that in future PIRs?
Mark, I might just hand to you there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. The PIR modelling definitely has been calibrated or tweaked to reflect the real world situation. So the noise from the aircraft will be more accurate. So the modelling results around the Primrose Sands or the Connolly's Marsh areas are more reflective of what's actually happening.
Is that just at a noise level, or does it also has it got the revised contours and that kind of thing that helps explain the extent of impact?
Yeah, so there are revised contours that will better reflect the extent of the contact of the aircraft noise levels. Yeah.
Okay. There was a question just here. Sorry.
Hi, another Dave. Just following on from those from the previous sort of questions, I'm a bit confused about what you're actually calling the levels, particularly with Tim's answer then to, or information then, just around how impactful this actual dB measure is. Is it relative to a long-term average in that area? Is it relative to how often you actually hear that increase? Is that modelling taken into it, or are we talking about basically an absolute 70 dB, for instance, over nothing for a start? And just towards that other question too, back in 2017, this whole thing was raised as well around the modelling and the noise modelling, and I think the ANO at the time suggested that this wasn't a good way to go and that something should change around the actual noise modelling itself. And the whole idea of reflective increases around water, particularly around the body of water around Norfolk Bay and Blackman Bay in particular, was shown to be pretty impactful at the time, but it doesn't seem like any of that's been taken into account with this, with what went into this construction and the ultimate review.
Thanks, Dave. I guess one thing to point out, there's different ways of communicating aircraft noise to the community. And, you know, like the average contours and planning contours aren't very good at actually communicating how many events you'll have or how loud that event's likely to be. So best practice generally is to communicate how many times you'll get an event and at what sort of level. And often there's a bit of a scale that's provided as well to say, well, you know, 60 dB is the sort of level where you would internally get a disruption in your conversation in a room if you were experiencing that internally. And so as a general rule, if you looked at 60 dB at night and you had about a 10 dB reduction from a building with the windows open, then you get about 50 decibels in at night. And above that, that's where you'd start to see some sort of interference with your sleep. And similarly with the 70 dB, if you were inside and you had a 10 dB reduction, then you would get 60 dB internally, and that may interfere with conversation or impact you inside of the dwelling. So what we're doing here is we're aligning with that best practice, and we're communicating how many times you will get a 60 or a 70 dB event and how many times a day and at what location. And then what we've done is we've taken the noise modelling and we've calibrated it and updated the information so that the information we're presenting gives you a good indication of what actual noise models or levels you would experience, what time of day and how often. So just want to be super clear, that's what the report is speaking to and communicating. And then more than that, one of the other ways that we can do that is to combine that information with things like the altitude of the aircraft and stick it on a map where you actually have flight paths, and we say how often you'll get an event and at what sort of height you'll have it. So that all of those things are being incorporated into the PIR report. I'm not aware of any other ways to beat that in terms of what we can communicate on noise. And we're doing the very best we can with the information available to communicate how that'll be. Now, in speaking to the other point that's really important for Hobart, we recognise that there's low ambient noises, you know, for a lot of the areas around Hobart and in rural areas. And so we speak to that, but we're not trying to draw a comparison and say, well, because it's really noisy around you or if it's really quiet. We're giving you the absolute information based on what we're seeing and what we're predicting, and allowing each community member to then interpret how that impacts them. And that's what the PIR is doing. It's capturing the feedback from the community about how they you know, relate to that experience and how it impacts them, which is different around different parts of the country, around Hobart, and for each person.
Okay, just another question here.
Hello, it's Susie here. I'm just wondering if you could confirm that you have actually not included any water sources in your noise modelling. Have I understood that correctly? I just wanted to make sure, because you're actually trying to investigate further on, you know, flights past Maria Island, Marion Bay area, or water bodies, and you're saying that you actually can't assess the noise impact on the communities properly because you're not modelling with the water bodies present.
So
Susie,
yeah, okay, Tim, you go.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to have a bit of a go at that. I think there's a little bit of confusion here. Our noise model is predicting the noise levels that you would receive on the ground. It doesn't matter whether it's land or water, from an aircraft above you. And that is being done in the model, absolutely. What we're speaking to is, if you want to refine the model even further, is there any component of the noise modelling that looks at how noise, in a very technical sense, interacts with the water and potentially bounces around or changes that? And what we're saying is, no, that level of detail is not included, but the noise model is predicting what noise levels you would likely receive on the ground if you were under that event. And so the noise modelling is reflective of what the community would receive if you were sitting on a boat, 100 metres away from the noise monitor, what you would receive on the ground, whether you be on land or water. We're talking about the very technical components of it bouncing around as a result of the water. So, Mark, did you want to add anything there?
The only thing that I'll add is that going through the calibration process we have with the levels from the monitors, by increasing the noise levels in the model, we're kind of effectively assessing the noise like there was a. So if the noise if it's reflecting a bit more and you're getting a bit more measured at those noise monitors, if that's the reason why it's a little bit more, that may be the reason. But the PIR model then is calibrated to account for that. So that's the only thing I'll add there. Yeah.
So to clarify, yes, the modelling includes land and water and those islands. It's all included in the noise predictions and the noise levels. All we're saying is that we can't account for reflection off the water if that changes how noise actually interacts. But yeah, the areas that you're interested in can be modelled. So it's just a quick follow-up question on that.
But it could be potentially much higher if that would have been included, because we don't actually
Susie.
know how it actually affects the noise.
Susie, thank you. It is a good point. We get that, and we can look at that. But what we're saying is that the PIR model, so the one that we've built after looking at the real world, does take full account of what the noise is. Because regardless of how the noise was created, whether it was bouncing around because of the land or the weather or other factors that influence noise, what we received was louder than what we originally modelled, and we've fixed that by actually making sure that the model reflects the noise that was actually experienced over 6 months. So that means that the new model actually impacts and picks all of those impacts up. All we're saying is that we can't discern whether it was louder because there was fog or it was a cold day or because it was the water or the land. What we're saying is it is included.
All right, I'll just come down here, take a few more questions. We do want to move on to the next part of the presentation, so I'll take the last sort of 3 or 4 questions and then we might move on and come back.
So I'm Glenn and I live at Carlton on the brink of Carlton River, and I don't need a noise monitor to tell me that the aircraft noise is too loud and intrusive. So can you put that in your model? Because it's 2,100 metres above ground. Feet, above ground. It is, in my books, just too loud. I'd rather listen to 10 pelicans squawk.
Okay, we'll take that as a statement. Was there a couple of other questions here just before we move on? So I'll just come down to David.
Yeah, David again. Sorry, just to reiterate, and I think it speaks to what Glenn was just saying, it's not about the decibels, it's about the impact. And I take your point, Tim, that you're saying, all we do is we just communicate the impact. But in terms of when you're making decisions about how your changes might affect people, I do think you need to consider the impact, not the noise. And again, I just direct you to the ANO's previous report where she explicitly was stating what you should be looking at is the proportional change. So, you can say you'll expect noise that's 4, 10, 20 times as loud as what you've previously experienced, and that is easy to measure. And in fact, probably your noise monitoring has measured the ambient noises at those sites. I don't know. But I think that would be a more legitimate and more accurate and more effective way of determining impact to inform your decisions. And it would also be consistent with the EPBC Act, which you're required to follow. So I really don't think it's satisfactory just to provide these raw noise figures and then try and tell us that this is just communicating what we can expect. We know what the impact is. And you need to go away and think about how is this impacting people, human beings on the ground.
Okay, so again, we'll
Thanks,
take that
David.
one as... We'll take that one on notice, and what we might do, Tim, we'll just make a note to provide some further information about how we've addressed some of that feedback and what we're doing now, and if there's something we can then do to look at improving that, then we'll provide some actions around that. Okay.
Thanks, Donna. Just one thing I wanted to mention on that. It's just really important that everyone recognises that noise modelling is us looking at what the predicted impacts are. Our flight path design principles then say, okay, well, based on what we're predicting the noise is going to be, how can we go about getting the best outcome? And that's very much about how we look at what David's talking to, which is what is the impact on the community. So how might we share the noise around, how might we consider cultural impacts? How might we look at where there's noise sensitive sites? And that is included in what we do. So it's very important to call that out. The noise modelling is just predicting what the noise is going to be, and we're communicating it in the best way. What we actually do with it then is apply the flight path design principles, and that's exactly what we're applying in this process is for the PIR. So we can certainly add to that later on, but I just want to call that out.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So just another question here.
Hi, it's David again. I'm just a bit worried about the fact that modelling is being referred to as being the be-all and end-all. You know, realistically, the number of monitoring sites that you actually had giving you data feeding into your model was fairly sparse compared to the actual areas that you're looking at, which are pretty the topography of those areas is pretty complex. You've got lots of open bays, enclosed bays, like, again, Norfolk Bay and the like, which I don't think actually had a noise monitor on it. And so with the handful of sites you've got and the data you've got, to build a complex model which is going to, you know, say it's going to reflect all the noise that you're going to get in the correct levels seems pretty surprising.
Okay, Mark, could you just talk to that, please, about how we ensure that that's a valid process?
Yeah, sure. So we do have the terrain in the model. So it builds a fairly kind of complex terrain model, which you'll see the noise contours as they come towards a mountain or a valley. They might kind of move or stretch accordingly for that. And we find that when we do have our short-term monitors out in locations that enable us to calibrate our modelling efforts to better reflect the noise levels at those other locations, at those other areas as well. So we don't typically need noise monitors all over the place to be able to calibrate the model, and the terrain is taken into account.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Mark. Is everybody okay if we move forward? We're just one more question. Okay, we've just got one more question, and then we'll move on. I'm just going to stand behind you here.
Sorry, at the risk of delaying the moving forward. My name's Matt. I think the point is that sort of summarises this is, this has been going on for 4 or 5 years or however long, and the change. It's about the change and newly overflying places. So it really is. All this is precipitated by a change in flight paths. Now, you had your reason for changing, but it just highlights this whole thing about your relative back now noise and the new aircraft. So it's not about the absolute noise, it's about newly overflying communities that aren't previously overflown. Now I know someone's going to tell me that we don't classify as newly overflown because occasionally a plane went overhead, but in practice we're newly overflown. These are new flight paths. So when you're thinking about how to design flight paths, you really should lend a lot of weight to, is this somewhere that is used to aircraft noise or is it not? And no matter what the models say, there should be some, weighting given in a design of a flight path to whether these places are used to aircraft, have aircraft been there for decades, or is this new for them? And that will make a big difference to how communities accept changes in flight paths.
Okay, yep, and I'll just briefly, I guess, respond to that. Certainly, from an environmental modelling or a noise modelling perspective, we do use those absolute numbers because that's part of the EPBC consideration in terms of triggering referral to the minister and so forth. But from a community perspective, what we look at is now we look at noticeability. So it could be like 40 decibels could be noticeable in some communities. In others, where it's already noisier, it might be 70 or 80. So our process is now, in terms of any flight path change that we implement, is that we look at firstly the triggers for EPBC, but from a community perspective, we do look at that noticeability. Now, I know that doesn't help you folk in terms of you've already had changes made and perhaps we didn't look at it in that way in the past, but that's certainly, you know, some of the lessons we've taken from the past and we're now implementing that. So, and again, when we go forward with the suggested alternatives and doing the review of those through our new change program, that's certainly what we'll be looking at. And when we come back and engage with you on the findings from the environmental assessment of any of those proposed changes, we'll be looking at it with you from a noticeability perspective as well as an improvement perspective. All right, so we might just move on to the next slide.
Thanks, Donna.
Now, we did have in the agenda a short break here. Do you guys want to, do you want a break to go to the bathroom and stretch your legs, or are you happy just to chug on? Keep going? Okay, we're going to chug on. Excellent. All right, so over to you, Tim.
Thanks. Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to touch on here was the newly overflown, which was a great segue. So thank you, Matt. And as Donna said, it's very important that we do look at the relative change and we do take that into our thinking. In the PAR, we committed to look at the newly overflown criteria and also apply the original methodology we did for the EA to make sure that the PAR reflects that, so we could pick up any changes, and that's what we've done. So I guess a bit of a narrative here. The slide on the very left shows what the noise contours were that actually derive where we look geographically for impacts. So when we were doing that theoretical noise model, we predicted this is where the change is going to have an impact on the community. We then, in the middle, had a look at that set of flight paths, actual flight paths, to determine whether or not there were flights over that area before we made a change. And you can see there in the middle, that's the 2018 data. That shows that there were flights in that area where we predicted there was going to be changes for the community as a result of the final airspace design. Now, one of the criticisms that we had in the past was, well, you only looked at 2018 and you didn't look at the period before the change. And the reason we did that is because we were addressing the community concerns that were raised as a result of the change. But what we have done in this process is gone back and had a look at that period before using the same methodology. So on the top right there, you'll see January to July 2017. And those are the actual flight tracks from the period before we made any changes in September 17. And you can see those areas are overflown as well. So you can see there on the left-hand side, that's how we identify where we need to look. In the middle is where we did look to determine whether there were going to be changes there and if there were any flights. And then on the right-hand side is the period before. And you can see there's significant overflight in that area as well. And then on the bottom right, what we've done is a zoom in for the area of interest where we predicted there were going to be impacts. And you can see there between January and July 21, with the new SIDS and stars, there's still flight there and there's still overflight.
It's obviously a lot more concentrated though, Tim, as a result of the changes. Is that what that's showing, that it's actually concentrated, the flight paths over that area?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Donna. So part of following SIDS and stars and part of the safety by design and following the ICAO rules is that we have to keep the aircraft apart from each other and strategically separate them from each other. And how we do that is by concentrating them into roads, if you will, in the sky so that they actually have an allocated space, so that they don't conflict with each other. And so we are seeing that more intense use, and that's what our PAR model picked up, is that as a result of that more intense use, there is higher noise levels on the ground, and that's why we've come forward with that.
Okay, I've got a few hands springing up here, Tim. I'll just first question, just one moment.
Is there an actual number of flights that have flown over? So you've got a great big green blob. Can you actually break them down to number of flights per area? Because your maps seem to be totally inconsistent and hard to follow.
I don't know who I'm talking to. Sorry, I didn't.
Andrew.
Andrew, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, this is actually the two images there on the right are all of the tracks for the 6-month period. So the absolute volume of traffic that we saw, and this is more importantly is the methodology that we used to identify whether there were impacts or overflight. It wasn't about the number of overflights. It was, are there flights there over that community in any volume at all? And that's what we're seeing and demonstrating because it's around the original methodology. Now, of course, Don talked to this, and I think Mark can cover it in a second, but that's not how we look at things necessarily moving forward as a learning from this process. But what we are demonstrating here is that we identified the correct communities that were going to have the impact. We looked at whether there were flight paths and overflight there, and then we put those flight paths in those locations where there were flights. And then what we're showing here is that we've actually addressed that concern from the community that prior to any change there was no flight in those areas, and this demonstrates that there were significant levels of flights in those areas using the same methodology.
Albeit operating differently, I think. But just another question here.
Just if you could point out which is which. I actually don't understand the difference.
Between the two. Okay, so the green is your departure and red are arrivals. So, so these ones are going out, these ones are coming in. Yeah, so that's 21. So this is January to July 2017. So again, arrivals are your red, departures are your greens. Just one moment, I just need you to have the microphone.
On the map, the 2017, January to July, how big an area does that cover of the state?
So, Tim, how much?
We might have to take that one. We might have to take that one on notice. I think you're asking about the geographical area.
Yeah, the geographical area that's covered.
Yeah, we don't have that easily to hand, but we can certainly come back and give you an answer, no problem.
So can we put that on as a note to add to this as part of the feedback, Tim? I'll come to this side of the room in 1 second.
I'm Sharon. Prior to 2017, and probably like a lot of people here, I was never overflown at all. I didn't have an incoming or an outgoing flight path. And yet your map seems to suggest that you had those flight paths going over my home. It didn't happen. Can you...
Sharon, thank you for your comment. What we're showing here is the actual radar tracks that were recorded for that period. So all we're doing is taking the actual flight tracks that occurred over that period and putting them on a map and putting a colour for a departure or an arrival. So I can't comment on whether you were overflown specifically as in your property, but I can say that if you're under one of those green or red flight paths, then you were overflown in that period between January and July 2017.
Could it be an altitude thing, perhaps, that the aircraft were higher than they are now, and therefore it wasn't as noticeable? Tim, is that something we can look at altitude, or is?
It's possible, but it would depend exactly where you live in relation to those flight paths.
So these tracks are recorded on our ANOM system, so it's data that's registered through our noise and flight path monitoring system. So it's actual data that we've got.
Yep. I live directly in front of Bavu, B-A-V-U-W, and if you'd like to go back to that, I would like the data on this area.
So we'll take that on notice. That might be something we can get NCIS to pull up for us and we can share with you. So can we just make a note to have a look at that? I might contact you separately, Sharon, to see if we can get that information. Okay, over to this side.
Yeah, this is John again. Is that an indication of 12 months of flight activity, is it? 6 months.
No, John, hi. Sorry, it's 6 months. So we did a 6-month original PAR period, and then what we've done is we've aligned that with the January to July.
So there were no aircraft over South Arm in a 6-month period, is that what you're saying?
This is the actual flight tracks. So this is showing you the actual flight tracks for the period between January and July.
Is that all aircraft? Is that helicopters, light aircraft, commercial planes? Is that what it's showing?
So Mark?
I'll just add in there, Tim. The images on the right are for aircraft that are associated with Hobart Airport. It won't have any of the smaller smaller stuff from Cambridge, I believe.
So no Antarctic flights happened in that period?
No, there are Antarctic flights during that period.
Where are they? Where are they?
It's going to be one of those flight tracks that are there. All we're showing here is the actual flight tracks that were recorded in that 6-month period. We haven't done any analysis on where they were going in the city pair analysis. We wanted to demonstrate that the areas of geographical interest that we identified would have an impact for the change had overflight in the past, and that's what this demonstrates. We're happy to look at, if you've got questions about specific flights, we can take those on notice, but that wasn't the intent of the PAR or the scope.
I'm just looking at this. There are some flights, like there's some fine lines sort of heading off down here, so it might just be that they're not as concentrated as flights to and from the mainland. Back to David.
Yeah, hi Tim. Look, I mean, you're telling us that black is white here. I mean, everyone knows that our experience was that we were not overflown. I just wanted to ask you two questions. One was, you've said your methodology in the sort of 2017 period determined that we were overflown, despite the ANO and your own environmental staff saying that we weren't. So firstly, what was the methodology? I mean, how many flights are we talking about that qualify us as previously overflown? And those flights, top right diagram, how many flights is that equivalent to per week, say, or over the 6-month period? So I think they're quite sparse looking at them compared to the flights close to the airport. So two questions. What was the methodology, which I assume you do know? And if you have to come back to us with how many flights per week or month or whatever day does that correspond to, I think that would be helpful for people to sort of understand why you're telling us that we were overflown when obviously, you had 200 complaints as soon as these new flight paths came in 2017. So, I mean, it's obviously evidence that people didn't experience themselves as being previously overflown. And the whole point of that category of previously overflown goes to what I was talking about before as impact, and what Matt was saying, that if you weren't previously overflown, you didn't experience yourself as previously overflown, when you do get overflown, it's going to have a much stronger impact on you.
Okay, so I think that's one we might have to take on notice, do we, Tim, if we can have a look at if we can find data on the number of flights, because I doubt we have that to hand at the moment.
Yes,
and what was the methodology?
The methodology, I think Mark could certainly cover now pretty easily in terms of how we applied the methodology. In terms of the numbers, we could take that off and come back with an answer. Mark, did you want to just quickly cover the methodology at the time?
Yeah, I can talk to the methodology. So we first use our noise modelling to determine where the contours are an N60 of 10. And on the left-hand side, it might be hard to see there, but the purple line is the original EA. And it has I guess a little kind of contour coming across the Primrose Sands kind of area. So the methodology was we do the modelling, we find out where that area of interest is, and then we overlay that with the actual radar track information, which is the middle slide there that we used in the original EA to determine geographically or visually whether there's an overflight in that geographical area. And that was the methodology.
So the question was, what was the methodology for determining previously overflown? But I think that's what Mark's just explained, that they look at where the flights are going to go. So it said here, they then get the radar tracks and it shows that there's flights in that same area. So if you compare the little purple bit. Yeah. So was there a hard number that was looked at with that, Mark, back then in terms of is there a number that's considered previously overflown? I don't think we had a hard number.
No, we did. That's correct. The criterion didn't have a hard number to say once a week, once a day, or or any number at all. So we looked at it on a geographical kind of visual kind of way.
So that middle image was for a 3-month period, so it's certainly not once a year. That's showing several flights, but yeah, at that stage we didn't have a hard number that we looked at for. There's a methodology, but it's not a hard number-based methodology.
It's Susie again, and if you come back with some data to us, could you include the altitude of the aeroplanes going, the red lines here, the sparse ones, and the size of the aeroplane or jet? Because I think that makes a difference. And I would like to reinforce that we all feel like we have not been overflown previously. And when the new flight path had been introduced, it was also stated that they actually go over land that's not populated. There is no residence or houses there, and it was absolutely wrong, and it was picked up by the Ombudsman as well. So, the initial assessment was not done properly.
Right, we'll take that as a comment on notice. Another question here.
G'day, Daniel again. So basically, if you've had a plane fly over you at any stage, you're previously overflown, so that's anywhere in the whole of Australia, I would imagine, the whole of Tasmania. But looking at the map on the right, the top right, and then the bottom left, there's a gaping gap in between on the bottom right between flights where the planes used to be and where the planes previously were. Now, all you've done is move those thousands of planes to a pathway and an aircraft highway out to the east. All these people here live out to the east, and all the people that live near the airport don't get any planes anymore. It doesn't make sense. Can you explain why the paths aren't close to the airport and why you're pushing them all out over on people who've never been overflown before?
Okay, so that might be one that perhaps, Tim, are we best to go to Nigel for that one, or have you got something you want to open with on that one?
Yeah, I think it'll become pretty apparent as we go through the community suggested alternatives why the flight paths are where they are. It's probably best to touch on them one by one and talk to the the impacts and the changes that have been put forward by the communities both near and far from the airport, because there's been suggestions from both. So perhaps that's the best way.
Okay, so we'll take that one on notice and talk to it as we go through a review of the flight paths. Have we got a comment online?
Sorry, I broke my own rules. Thanks. There's just a comment online saying it highlights the importance to measure the change in the experience of the people living in the areas overflown, both in increased flight volume and increased noise levels. So,
okay, so just a comment. Excellent. It's pretty consistent with what we've heard in the room. Okay, back.
Hi, it's John again. You've indicated that you really didn't have a methodology for working out what was previously overflown earlier. What's your current methodology?
Okay, Mark, do you want to respond to that, please, in terms of how we currently look at newly overflown?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. I think you kind of touched on it at the start of this slide. We have a noticeability kind of analysis that we do where it does have some more of those hard numbers for a number of movements experienced during a day. So the criteria since the first assessment have definitely evolved and changed, but we will do the noise modelling and the analysis and to determine our areas of significance against the EPBC Act, which we have criteria around a 20% increase in levels. But then after that, we also do this a noticeability kind of analysis, and that really should help us, to determine who's going to notice the change and who's newly overflown in that sense. And when we find those areas out, we go for very targeted community consultation. So there is a line in the new criteria that I believe it's 1 movement per day from any aircraft.
And I think too, Mark, the criteria now also it's different for rural areas versus urban areas in terms of looking at that, I guess, that change, that extent of change, the number of aircraft movements and the noise levels.
Yes, sorry, that's right. We will do some extended contours, and when we're looking at those rural areas, we're looking at some really low kind of noise levels around the 40 dB. So we'll show where the noise levels will be quite low when it's an urban residential area or in a built-up area. It's more like the 50 dB type level.
Okay, so we've just got a follow-up question from Daniel on that, and then if there's a couple more questions, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, it's fairly frustrating that goalposts keep getting changed every time we have a new consultation on flight paths. All we want to do is have the current methodology applied to the pre-2017 flight paths. We don't want to be classed as the current flight paths being the existing flight paths. We've been fighting since 2017, and the current flight paths that we have are prior to 2017, not the ones since then. So if you're going to apply these new methodologies and measurements and scales, please apply it back to 2017. Otherwise, we're classed as having a flight path over the top of us, and we don't.
Okay, I'll just take that one as a statement. I guess the challenge we've got is that at the moment we're not going to go back to 2017 and throw all the flight paths out and start again. So what we're wanting to do through this process is see where we can improve things. So I take on board that people had a different situation pre-2017, but the industry has also shifted in that time and moving to these, the RNP and SIDS and STARS and all of that is part of the industry evolution. So what we want to do through this process is not go back to 2017 all the time. We want to try and look at what we can do with these existing flight paths to see where we can get some improvements for the community. So that's what we're actually trying to do through this process. So I'll go John, Matt, and then David.
Yeah, John again. We really need to see the details on how you've determined newly overflown. I mean, you've glossed over it in conversation here where you said 1 a day this and 50 dB that. We need to see a written example of what policy you're working to, otherwise we cannot have a sensible community consultation regarding it.
So are you talking about what we use now? You're wanting to see that? Okay, we'll take a note to provide that. Okay, so Matt.
Just looking at the top right chart, which, from the office there might look like we weren't nearly overflown, but obviously we were, because otherwise you wouldn't have heard about us when you made these change. If you're trying to inform a model of what nearly overflown is, you've got some pretty good data there that might feed into that. Those flight paths before, no one really noticed for whatever reason. I don't know why. I can't see it from here, but can you count those red lines? That's 6 months. 6 months of red lines. It doesn't look like many.
Matt, we're happy to
but I think that'll be sorry. Yeah. So if we could find out what that is over 6 months, like David asked, it'd be good. But I think that'd be good information to inform your newly overflown criteria. That maybe you don't have a very good criteria at the moment, but.
Yeah, so I think we've already taken an action that we'll look to see if we can get that data on the number of flights, and also I think altitude was something that we were asked as well, so we'll see if we can grab that information. So just back to David.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Look, I don't think anyone wants to go back to 2017. We all accept that things need to change and improve, and that's good for everybody in terms of safety, efficiency, etc. But what I think is important is, pardon me, that we are still judged by the standard of our experience in 2017, because it is the case we weren't previously overflown. You can show me those lines on the map, that's fine, maybe the planes were there, but the experience was that we were living in an area that did not have commercial jets overflying us. And I think that needs to be still considered even now, because what's happened is there's been a review, and this is another review of that review. And so I think we're really in the space of still, in a way, reviewing the existing decision. And what has happened is that in the last review that was done, we were considered previous overflown because due to the fact that the paths that were under review had been put over us. And the ANO did find that was unfair and inappropriate. And I think the attempt to sort of somehow demonstrate that come on guys, you were just previously overflown, what are you talking about, is a bit egregious and unrealistic, and and I really do think that you do need to. Your original environmental assessment says we were overflown previously, and you're telling me that there was no criteria for that. So I think that should be enough to you to accept that we were previously overflown, because you found that, and you don't have any other criteria from that time to refute it.
Okay, so I think what we'll do, like we've got the 2017 data there that is pre the original change. We'll look to provide some information back to the community on the number of flights, the altitude, and also if we can get aircraft type. I'm not sure what we can pull out of our system from there, but we'll pull out as much data as we can to show you what that looked like. And we'll also look at what the methodology was then and what it is now, so you can see where we've changed. And I note, you know, there was a comment that it's frustrating that every time there's a review or whatever, our criteria or our methodology changes. That's actually part of our, I guess, evolution in trying to improve the way we do these assessments. It's a continual improvement process, and so we are trying to do things better. I know that doesn't make up for things in the past that people may feel weren't done as well, but we're certainly trying to take the lessons from the past where we can and improve our current processes. So that's why you will see some change as we move forward. I'll just take this one more question and then we'll move on.
It's David again. I was just interested into where does the actual radar data come from? Where's the radar site? Given there's been lots of talk about radar for Hobart and the like, I'm assuming this is radar from Melbourne.
Okay. Do you want to talk
Anthony in the room might be Anthony.
Okay. He's right over the other side of the room, Tim.
Give him a chance as well.
Just to clarify that question, where is the radar heads based, or where is the information coming from? What was?
Yeah, where's the information for these tracks, and do we have a radar site somewhere that we're gathering this data from?
We have a couple of mixed surveillance technologies here. It's not a spinning radar head, but they're all fixed. There's a wide area multilateration and an ADS-B sites that collect this data as well. So the data is collected here from sites here and the surveillance sites here. It is sent to Melbourne and processed there for their use in the en route centre, and that's where this data's come from. It's recorded. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just surprised in the past there's been much talk about radar for Hobart, and the fact that Hobart didn't have radar, and yet we have a track here saying that this is Hobart radar.
Okay, so the question for those listening online was that there's been a lot of talk about radar in Hobart and the fact we don't have radar, but then we've got these tracks being recorded. So what is the situation in terms of radar in Hobart?
Yes, we have surveillance capability here. In the tower, we're not equipped to use it for separation purposes at the moment. We're an older tower, and that's in the process of evolving. But certainly the information used is by the overlying sectors that are based in Melbourne Centre, and they're using that surveillance information for their purposes and for separation.
All right, we might move on to the next section, Tim. So where are we up to?
Thanks, Donna. Nige, can you, next slide, please? Great, okay, so we'll see if we can get through these pretty quickly and then get into the community suggested alternatives. Part of the scope was to look at the noise abatement procedures, the high level routes, the VOR, and of course the environment impact assessments that we just looked at. We took a look at the high level route changes, and this is the airspace that's 2 to 3 kilometres above the ground, depending on how high the ground is. And what we found is that the aircraft are connecting with the SIDS and STARS, and the aircraft are actually tracking to the high level route changes that we expected. They're often higher than what we thought, which is a good thing for the communities on the ground. And overall, there was a little bit less traffic than what we previously predicted, because there was a softening of the traffic as a result of COVID. And on this, we're just showing that the new routes are green and the deleted routes are red. It's a little hard to see, but did anyone have any questions on that for the team?
Nope, move on.
Okay, Nige, thank you. Right, the next part was the review of the VOR relocation, and in the past, the way that aircraft approached the airport was using a VOR predominantly, and what's happened is as we've moved to new technology, this has become just a backup navigational aid that's part of that system that we keep just if things go down. we had to move it slightly. What we found here is that that aircraft were using it a lot less than we originally predicted in the EA, which was around 2 times per day, and what we're seeing is about once per day. The other thing that changes that where it was a predominantly used by jets and all of the commercial aircraft coming into Hobart, that's now been restricted to aircraft that are around 5,700 kilograms or less. And what we also found in our review was that there was a short period where 9 aircraft used the VOR, and they shouldn't have used the VOR according to the noise abatement procedures, and that's because there was a misinterpretation of the way that the en route supplement was interpreted by our controllers. What that resulted in us noticing that and fixing that, and so from that entire 6-month period, we only saw 9, of which 7 were passenger jets using it, and that was fixed.
Okay, move on.
Thank you. And then the noise abatement procedures. So this is firmly in scope, and we've had a few suggestions in this space. Air Services also, when we first reviewed the initial data that was coming, or data, whichever you prefer, coming out of the findings, we noticed that there was a lot of flights over some of those areas closer to the airport, and that there were some suggestions coming in from the community as well around looking to maybe share some of those noises or those noise events around the different flight paths. We found that overall aircraft were following the noise abatement procedures. The exceptions which are included in there were the flights to Antarctica, military or medical, which have priority. Like I mentioned before, we had slightly less aircraft using the VR than what we predicted, and there was the conflict between what the noise abatement procedures said needed to happen and what actually did happen on 7 occasions where jet aircraft, so remember 9, 2 of those weren't actually jet aircraft or above 5,700 kilograms. So we fixed that pretty quickly, and that's what we found overall in the noise abatement procedure piece.
Okay, we've just
Any questions at all on that?
Yep, we've just got one question on that. I'm just power walking to the other end of the room.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, g'day, it's David again. I was a bit surprised by this noise abatement procedure when it was published because there was no consultation about it. Is it the case that if jets were able to use the VOR, that they would be able to depart and approach much closer to the airport than they currently do?
Thanks, David. There's a few aspects that we'd need to address there. The first is that we're moving towards using SIDS and STARS for the way that aircraft approach and depart the airport, and that's in line with what we have to do to meet our obligations under safety. So it's not really an option to go back and use a VOR in anything other than the capacity as part of the backup network. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the consultation on how the noise abatement procedures are working is occurring as part of this PAR. So if the basics were that the aircraft need to fly the SIDS and STARS during tower hours, and that we restrict that use so that we don't have big jets flying the VOR, is that working for the community? Is that working for industry? And that's what the PAR is trying to tease out and get feedback on. And indeed, we have had feedback. So hopefully that answers your question.
So Tim, are we saying though that the use of the VOR by larger jets, that's not acceptable based on new standards that we have to apply, that's not an option to have them fly the VOR?
That's correct. It's acceptable as part of the backup network. So if all the other systems go down and we've got another option, then this can be used. But those are the only real circumstances where, and indeed, it's not even allowed to be used for training. So that's very much the case, Donna.
Okay, just another question from David.
Sorry, just to follow up. If that's the case, why is there a noise abatement procedure if the jets aren't allowed to use the VOR?
The noise abatement procedure is focused on using the SIDS and STARS, not the VOR. So it's just noted here in the noise abatement procedure that it's part of the backup navigation network. But it's not the noise abatement is actually that the aircraft that are RMP1 capable, so all the jets and the commercial aircraft flying in and out of Hobart are required to use the SIDS and STARS, which have been developed and deployed for safety reasons and compliance. And so that's what this noise abatement procedure is saying.
Why would you have a noise? But what's it got to do with noise that you're enforcing use of SIDS and STARS? Why is it a noise procedure?
Well, if they follow the SIDS and stars, then the aircraft are going to be in the places that we predicted and communicated to the community where the noise is going to occur. Because if they're following the VOR, they're going to be in a very different place from where we were communicating the noise would be. And they're also going to be in a very different place from where our controllers are expecting them to be, because they should be following the SIDS and stars. So that provides assurance that the noise and the events are occurring in the places that we predicted.
Hang on just one second.
But that doesn't make sense. If they have to use the SIDS and stars, fair enough. But in that case, then you wouldn't need a noise abatement procedure. So why is there one except to stop them using the VOR, which is I can't read the screen very well, but it looks like number 3. It looks like this is specifically to stop them using the VOR, and it's got nothing to do with forcing them onto the SIDS and stars, because they're forced onto them anyway, I think is what you're saying.
If we didn't have this noise abatement procedure, Tim, would it be clear that they have to fly the SIDS and stars? Is that what it's for, or?
That's part of it. I mean, our controllers and the design is about delivering a system that gives safety by design. So the SIDS and stars are used, and this is just encouraging that and making sure that that there's that's considered in the noise. I would say these noise abatement procedures are by no means perfect, but we're inviting comment and feedback from community and industry about it, so that we can look at what improvements could be made. So these are probably the pretty basic, follow the SIDS and stars as we'd expect, and don't use the VOR.
Which keeps the aircraft noise where we expect it to be.
Yes.
Yep.
That's
okay.
right.
But we
and
do
that's
have.
What they're doing.
So, but we do have a proposed, I think, an improvement to the noise abatement procedures through this, do we, Tim?
Yeah, we do. We have one that we considered initially,
Yep.
and we also have feedback from the community on it.
Okay, so we'll get to that as we go through the suggested alternatives. All right, well, one more question.
Just a quick one, David again. Just more broadly, I guess, there's sort of surprise about, there wasn't as many aircraft on the VOR that the model predicted or that we were predicting. And as we go through this more generally, this is a post-implementation review, but it's a review of a year that's really an outlier in terms of COVID impacts and the like. And so I'm just wondering how much weight going forward is going to be placed on the data for this year, given that we potentially going to be stuck with the outcomes of this for many years to come. And as aircraft and the aircraft industry it grows again, gets back into action, just how much of is this going to be taken into account moving forward? Are we going to be building a new system based on a year of data that's not going to be representative of what's going forward?
Okay, I might take that one. So, so we acknowledge that, the last couple of years, or last year and a half, has been abnormal from an air traffic perspective, but we did do some data gathering pre-COVID that's helped us with this PIR. But importantly, when we're looking at these improvements that we move forward with, when we go through the flight path change program and implement those, whatever those changes come out of this process, there will be another review done after they've been implemented, and so hopefully by then we're back to whatever the new normal is, and that's another opportunity to have a look at how the flight paths are operating. So we will be doing a post-implementation review of anything we implement as a result of this change. So I guess that's the time that hopefully industry's back to normal and we can look at what's really happening. So sorry, for those online, the question was what would the time frame be for that? So where we implement a change to flight paths or airspace, we do a post-implementation review 12 months after that change, because that gives us time to capture that seasonal data. And Hobart in particular is a very seasonal airport. It operates very differently in winter to the summer months. And so we need that full 12 months to be able to capture that operational data and the noise data. So it'd be 12 months after implementation.
So going back to a question that was put earlier on, was if we went to some of these other flight paths presented here, that they would be implemented in 12 months, then potentially 2 years' time there would be a review.
Yep. Yeah, so I appreciate that seems like a long time, but we have a process that we have to go through to to design new flight paths, assess them, engage on them, get approval from CASA and then implement them. And there's a lead time to publishing new flight paths as well, because it has to be coded into aircraft systems and so forth. So it seems like a long time, and it is, but it's the time frame that we need to do these sorts of changes. All right, Tim, can we move forward? Are we up to the suggested alternatives?
I hope so. I think we've
Can
got...
I just check, is everybody good to keep going, or do you need a leg stretch? No, we're right to keep going? Okay. Oh, we're not there yet. We're at community information. Let's
just
do
one
this
more.
quick.
I think this one I'll be quick. I mean, I think this speaks to some of the commentary that's come up prior in the session. One of the things that we found was that there was differences in the information provided in 2018 and 19 based on the actual operations from the data that we saw in the PIR, and that relates to like how high the aircraft were, in the historic sense, and how often they were occurring on flight paths, etc., and on those specific SIDS and stars we mentioned. We've obviously got the Engage website, which was launched as a result of the review that happened in Hobart, and which allows communities to go in and find out how often flight tracks are being used, and that capability's there right now. But what we're also going to do is release updated information which has those flight tracks and the altitude and the number of events that you could expect to see on those particular flight tracks, and we'll put that up on Engage and on aircraft in your neighbourhood. And I think we could probably use that same format, which is quite good, to do the information around some of those flight tracks that came up as part of the newly overflown discussion as well. So it's just a general improvement that we're making.
Okay.
Any questions at all?
Move on.
Okay, thanks, Nige.
Yeah, we've done our questions. We'll keep moving.
Next.
Yeah, we're not breaking. There are our two quickest slides so far. All right, so on to community suggested alternatives, please.
Okay, perfect. A bit of an intro here. We actually had 34 submissions from community. There were 19 flight path change scenarios that came in for assessment. A lot of them fell into similar sort of themes, if you will, or thematic themes. And we looked at those, and they relate to going back to pre-2017, which we'll cover, and then moving around specific flight paths within geographical areas. They touched on some of the noise abatement procedures and some of those stars. So what we'll do is we'll work through those quickly as a group. Unless I'm stopped and you've got questions, I'll move fairly rapidly, because then we can get into the ones where there's a lot of interest. But
Okay,
if there
Tim,
is a lot of interest, please.
Just one question. David's just got a question on this.
Yeah, look, sorry, just a quick one. Look, you've said 34 submissions, and last time we were asked to put in submissions in our area, there were multiple submissions that were similar that a group I belong to, SECLA, helped to organise, and that was multiple submissions were treated as one. I spoke to you, Donna, about this, and so we organised for one submission this time, and we got over 100 people signing that submission, but that's not reflected here. So I think it's not really reflecting the the community engagement that you've received. There was more than 34 submissions. I mean, we could have got everybody to do individual submissions, but that wasn't accepted last time. So I just think that needs to be reflected somehow, that it's not just 34 submissions. There's 134 at least.
Okay, so I think take that point. But I mean, when we look at these things, it's not treated as a vote. So every submission is valid, whether it's one person that submitted it or 100. It's not a vote anymore. So it's not a vote. Every submission that's come in has been considered, and as Tim said, some of those submissions were actually very similar, and so we've grouped them. Again, once we go all we're looking for at this stage is what's a safe and feasible alternative that we can consider. So is it safe? Does it meet the standards? Does it improve noise outcomes? And does it not add too many extra track miles for industry and create a problem there? So that's really all we're looking at this stage. We then go through that flight path change program, and I guess that's when probably more of the numbers will come into it. So when we come back and engage on the outcomes of that flight path change program assessment, and we're talking to the community, if we get an overwhelming support or overwhelming opposition to a particular change proposal that we've assessed, then that's when we'll be looking at those numbers, I guess, a little more closely. Just a question down the front here.
Thank you. Yes, my name's Penny. I just had a question about that assessment of the submissions that you receive, and you mentioned, I suppose, also taking into account industry positions. Is there a document published stating what the weighting is given to those different views?
Yep, so oh boy, that just got really loud. Our flight path design principles basically say that like safety and compliance, absolute number one weighting, and then everything else is weighted equally. So industry versus community is given equal weighting. So we have had, like there are some submissions from the community that increase track miles for industry. We're still taking those forward. There's submissions from industry that reduce their track miles and do impact some communities. We're taking that forward because it's safe and feasible, but it's when we get into that flight path change program and we do the environmental assessment and we look at the noise contours, and then we look at it and go, okay, how many people are affected by this versus how many track miles does that save for industry? And we have to achieve a balance. There's no metric behind that. We don't go industry gets 2 and community get 1. It is a balancing act, and it is very subjective. Because you can't put a number on that. But if we saw something, for example, that saved industry a couple of track miles but impacted hundreds of people, we'd be less likely to go forward with that because we, you know, on balance, it's not a good solution. So
it's very important to know how many community members are affected, and therefore to have accurate numbers of flyover. You know, how many houses are flown over.
Yeah, and so that will come out in this next flight path change program review. We'll be able to look at that. We've just got a question online, and then I'll get to the 2 here.
Thanks, Donna. Just a question from Sebastian online asking around when measuring changes in flight numbers, do we also look at the proposed increase in flights into Hobart in the next 12 to 24 months, such as new routes with larger aircraft, for example, Air New Zealand, and increased flights from other capital cities?
Yeah, so that's part of our environmental assessment. We do look at the projected usage of the flight paths and if there would be an increase over the next 12 months or so, because, and that can, I mean, that's a challenge because, you know, we can project what will happen over the next 12 months, but that might not be, in 5 years' time we could have new flights going from different locations. So we can only base that on the information we've got from industry at the time, but we do consider that.
This is John. Yeah. What is the forum that you intend to use for submissions? Is this the forum where we're supposed to be submitting our views, or is there going to be another meeting, or are you going to do some online system? How is it going to work? How do you?
So which views are you talking about, or submissions? Are you talking about in terms of at the end of our flight path change program and we've looked at all of the impacts and we bring it back to the community, or are you talking about submissions on the report?
Submissions for the alternatives.
Yep, so we'll be doing engagement down here again. So we would likely have another meeting similar to this to go through. This is what the outcome of the flight path change program is. So the question is when we have the environmental assessment done for each of the proposals that we're taking forward. So probably 6 to 12 months, depending on when we can get them into our program based on that prioritisation. So another question from Daniel.
It just concerns me about playing the numbers game all the time. We've got people who live in a town like Murdunna, and there's potentially 10 people living there, and if they make a suggestion and they're competing against someone from Dodgers Ferry, for instance, where they've got a much large population, you're going to take that one from people with Dodgers Ferry over those people at Murdunna. And it's not a criteria, it's actually correct. It's just not a specific criteria that should be put in there. So if it's competing with the numbers of people overflown, it's just too simplistic. And I think a lot of these community suggested ideas are from people who are a bit more remote, and they're not even going to be considered those flight paths. So I just want that noted, that it needs to be more of a consideration that numbers game, it makes it virtually impossible for someone who lives remotely to compete with people living in more residential areas.
Yeah, and it is quite complex because You're right. I mean, one of our legislated requirements is to minimise as much as practicable the impact of aircraft operations on the community. The obvious way to do that is move flight paths from over densely populated areas and put them in less densely populated areas. But we don't necessarily always do that because we have to look at where are the flight paths now. I mean, in some areas where you've got, your runway aligned, it might go over a densely populated community and you just can't move that flight path because it's part of the standards. So it is a balancing act. It won't necessarily always come down to numbers. We have to try and balance a range of priorities. I've just got a follow-up question and then I'll come to you, Beth, and then there's another one up the back.
And that still doesn't make sense because if you live near an airport and you move into that area, why do you keep pushing paths further and further and further and further out? As cities and places get bigger and bigger, you're just going to keep pushing flight path lines further and further out. There's missing a vital criteria right at the start that should be try and get them as close as possible to the airport, and if we can't, then we'll start branching out from there.
Yeah, and I think generally that's the approach we apply. It's just there's separation requirements between flight paths, and so as you get more and more flight paths for different things, then you do end up going out. But yeah, we generally, when we do flight path changes anywhere, we try to stick to areas that are already impacted by those flight paths. We don't deliberately seek to go and spread them around, but sometimes depending on what the design requirement is, that is what happens. But we try to keep to those areas as much as possible.
So two things. I've had a request for a bathroom break, and the other one is it's a question from Sebastian. It's asking about if a flight path could be considered around the bottom of the Tasman Peninsula offshore, coming up Storm Bay, turning into the airport, talking about this would reduce noise levels, so I'm not sure.
Okay, so we probably can't assess that during the meeting, but we'll have a look at that after the meeting and provide a response to that one. And yeah, I'm not sure if it was submitted during the process, but we can have a look and provide a response. I'll just check with people in the room. Do we want a bathroom break or do we want to keep going? Okay, show of hands, keep going. This will be a vote. Oh, our online presenters need a break. Okay. Okay, well, they outweigh... No, see, that will leave me having to answer the really hard questions. So I'm going to say we'll have a 5-minute bathroom break so I don't get stuck with the tough questions. So it'll only be 5 minutes. That's it, guys. Hurry up and go to the bathroom real quick. We'll start again in 5 minutes. mic? Is the mic back on? It is. Okay, great. Tim, Mark and Nigel, are you back online?
Hi, Donna. Yes, we're back.
Okay, excellent. Alrighty, well, we'll continue now. So we're going to get into each of the options that's been assessed. And what I'll just ask is if you've got a question about any of the options, just pop your hand up. We'll do it one option at a time and then move through. So, Tim, first option.
Thanks, Nigel. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, thanks. All right, well, we've probably covered this already, but the criteria that we're doing the PIR assessment against are the ones that are in the terms of reference. I won't dwell on them, but they're the safety and operational compliance, which sit at the top of our flight path design principles. And then the other ones are the environment, the network, and the operational feasibility that sort of sit all side by side. And we look at those in the round when we're making our calls on this. I guess the other thing that I wanted to cover off just for the delegates that were asking, if you want to provide any commentary on the draft PIR report and the content of this, it is open for another 5 weeks from today. So you've got that full 6-week period of opportunity to submit your comments. So
the 6 weeks, sorry, John just looked bemused when you said 6 weeks. So we've got you can provide comments on the report back to us for the next 5 weeks. So it's been out for a week already. You've then got another 5 weeks after this meeting to provide us with comments. If you think we're wrong, if you don't agree with our finding, if you think something needs clarifying, you can give us that feedback and we'll consider that in finalising the report and then determining, you know, what actually goes through to that next step. We'll be republishing the report as a final. It will go up on Engage as a final. You can comment on it as much as you want. So you can keep telling, you can come back to, so what we normally do when we make changes, we'll track them so you can see where we've made changes in the report, plus we'll publish a clean copy. Happy to talk to you further if you still don't agree with us, but obviously there's a line in the sand that we have to draw, and that's when we'll move forward into our flight path change program. Next slide, please.
Thanks.
Hang on 1 second, you need the microphone. So John's just got a question, Tim, so just 1 minute before we get on to this first one.
Can you go back to that other slide?
Just on the previous slide, please, Tim. Or Nigel.
There's a couple of points here I don't quite understand. It says reduce noise levels or number of people impacted, and then affect new communities, and then better share the impact of noise in keeping with this. I don't understand that. Are you saying that you're happy to noise share onto communities that currently aren't overflown? How does that read? I don't quite understand the language there.
Yeah, so this is, these I guess are the questions that we ask when we're looking at these options. So we say, look, does it firstly reduce the noise levels? If it does, that's great. Maybe it goes from an N70 to an N60. Does it affect new communities? Well, that's probably not a good thing, and that's something that would count against it. Does it better share the impact? The flight path design principles talk to sharing the impact of operations, where it sort of, is practical, I guess. But it then says that proposals that simply seek to shift noise from one community to another, that's a negative. So it's kind of a balance. It's not that you tick each of these and it's an automatic entry. It's a consideration, a range of factors that we consider.
Right, so the statement to better share the impact of noise, that means sharing it between already overflown communities. Is that how that's meant to read?
Generally, yes. Yep. Okay, so next slide, please, Nigel, and our first suggestion that we considered.
Thanks, Donna. This slide's just to sort of set out how we went about doing the actual assessment. So as we move through the group and the people online understand how we did it. But essentially what we were doing is a desktop study. So we haven't gone to that next level where we've designed a procedure with flight path designers. We've essentially taken the idea and the suggestion from the community and put it on the map geographically. So it's an indicative flight path that we've used for their first cut and their assessment. As we go through this though, and if those ideas make it through to the next round of the detailed assessment, that's where we'll actually do the flight path design and have to adjust that to make sure that it's safe and feasible, or determine whether it can be done. And then we'll look at the detailed safety and feasibility along with the environmental assessment. So that's where we'll get into that noise modelling and all of the detailed stuff like the height of the aircraft, etc. What we did in this one to make apples with apples comparisons is we put a 500-metre buffer around the flight path so that we could actually have a look at the communities underneath the existing and then the proposed suggestions. And that's referred to as the 1 kilometre buffer in the report. And we've applied that through the process.
And can I just confirm, Tim, the black dots represent residential populations and the thin black lines, they're existing flight paths, is that correct?
The thin black lines are the nominal tracks, and in this case, those are all existing flight tracks. The black dots are actual homes, so the dwellings, and then the red dots or the red squares are the sensitive receptors, so schools, community halls, accommodation, hotels, and things like that. So when we're looking at making our comparison, we put a 500-metre buffer either side, and we do the 1 kilometre around that nominal track, and then we look at the number of black dots and the number of red squares underneath that to determine what the current and the predicted impacts would be.
Okay, and obviously these are all in the report that you can see on our Engage page, and it might be a little bit clearer in terms of the colours rather than on this screen because it does wash out a little bit when you're projecting.
Okay. As long as everyone just bears that in mind as we go through, that's what we're doing in this particular comparison. All right, if we're happy to move on, then I think we can probably get underway. Excellent. All right, so the first suggestion that we had was reinstate the flight paths to 2017. Donna's already touched on this, and I've touched on it as well. The VOR technology is being phased out because it's not as safe as the new technology that harnesses satellite technology and ground-based technology to deliver safer, strategically separated flight paths. So it's still useful as part of our backup navigational aids, but it's not the way that we're going to move forward with separating aircraft or allowing aircraft to proceed on the approach. And what we have to do is comply with the CASA mandates to adopt an international standards for satellite-based technology, which is happening across the world. So unfortunately, the 2017 flight paths do not meet the current designs, and it's not something that we can progress with as they don't meet our requirements.
Okay, we can move on. There's no questions about that one, although I know David's not in the room. I'll just double check with him when he comes back in if he's got any questions about that. Oh, David, you've just entered the room, as your ears must have been burning. So the first suggestion was just we can't reinstate the pre-2017 flight paths because VOR has been phased out. I just want to check you don't have any questions about that decision, or did you want to ask something on that?
Yeah, look, as I was saying before, I don't think anyone's wanting to go back to 2017 and previous situations, but if there are opportunities to reduce impact on community, I think we should definitely consider those. I don't think people really have enough technical knowledge to understand the difference between VOR, SIDS and STARS, etc. So I know there was the opportunity to ask a question about, I think use of VOR, and I hadn't realised that it was sort of there. So I think if that's something that can bring flights closer to the airport over those previously overflown communities, I think that's something that should be considered without reverting totally to September 2017 arrangements.
So can I just ask that Nigel, maybe you're the best one to answer this question. In terms of overlaying, I guess, new SIDS and STARS on that same VOR approach, is that something we can do, or is there a reason we can't mimic where aircraft used to fly with that VOR approach?
Thanks, Donna. Yes, so as people may have seen in the January to July 2017 flight paths, there were the red flight paths that came in on arrival close to the airport, and there were the red paths that sort of are about 12 to 15 nautical miles, or about sort of 18 to 20 kilometres further out. The VOR flight paths are actually the ones further out. Those ones coming in close to the airport, that's not on a VOR track. That's not VOR navigation. That's a visual approach. So when aircraft did track via the VOR, that straight line they come down from Iplet on what's called a radial, they would track towards the airport aid or the VOR at the airport, and then at some point air traffic control would say turn left and track for a right visual approach or a right downwind, and they would come in and turn really close next to the airport. one of the things a lot of the airline safety departments have done is sort of requested that they not be issued hand-flown visual approaches. So if we did put a star in to come and follow a visual approach, it probably couldn't be FMS coded, which they need to be now, similar to the one that sort of tracks via the Carlton River.
Sorry,
but if we were to put
FMS?
a star in with an FMS track to try and replicate that visual approach close to the airport, it wouldn't meet PANSOP's requirements, which it now has to. So if we were going to do any stars based off the VOR, that would actually be that star that tracks out via that arc for about a 15 nautical mile final. So that's the difference there.
So, and can you just explain what the FMS coding and
Flight
PANSOPs is, please?
Flight management system. So when I talk about FMS or flight management system coding, it's basically latitude, longitudes with a name similar to BAVA, similar to PDOS and all those other ones, where they're there, but aircraft can only use them in visual meteorological conditions.
And PANSOPs?
PANSOPs is our design criteria, so it's an ICAO document that's issued to all ICAO member states across the world, and our design criteria is based directly off that.
Okay. All right, John's just got a question.
Yeah, it's John here. With regard to the pre-27 flight paths, my understanding is with SIDS and STARS that there's a certain gradient that you have to adhere to on the approach to the airport, something like 3 degrees or whatever, which determines the radius of approach. However, I think I heard somewhere that when you're departing from the airport, you can follow any line you like, just get up there as quick as possible. So is it a fact that you could bring the departure SID closer to the airport than it is now?
Hi, John. Tim here. I think that's covered in one of the assessments that we've done, and we'll look at it. The next one that we're going to look at is the arrival and that descent, which you touched on, and then we will look at moving the jet departure closer to the airport as one of the assessments that we've done, which will speak to exactly that point.
All right, so we'll hold that until we get to that point. All right, we might move on from this one. So next one.
Thanks. Okay, so one of the suggestions we had here was, could we lift the height of the aircraft? And Nigel, maybe you do the pointer for me, but could we increase the altitude of the aircraft doing the RMPAR approach from Bava through to the airport there and make it higher? And as you just touched on, John, the descent profile has to be 3 degrees, and there isn't a lot of distance between that turn as we cross the coast and then the runway end to actually get down. So what we're doing is that procedure works to a 3-degree approach, and there isn't enough space for us to actually get that height off and meet the safety requirements. So on this particular suggestion, we weren't able to lift up the approaches flying the RMPAR closer to the airport, and it didn't meet our safety and operational compliance assessments. And what we've done there in the bottom right is we've actually just shown the height and the distance that you're travelling, and as you're following that 3 degrees, so you can see it visually that the aircraft's going along that blue line towards the airport, going to the touchdown point, and that's the height it'll be at. And obviously if you increase that, it means that you've got to lose a lot more height with the same amount of distance to run at the airport, so that increases the complexity, the workload, the management of the aircraft as well, because they don't always want to slow down. So that's not something that we can progress.
Okay, next one.
Thank you. Great. So we had quite a few suggestions in this area around moving the flight paths, and particularly that RMPAR that we just looked at, further to the east to the vacant land. And there was 2 suggestions or 2 broad themes that came out in this bucket. One was move it 2 to 3 kilometres to the east, that it can go through that vacant land between Connolly's Marsh and Primrose Sands, and you can see that's where that J on the bottom right looks at, and it's essentially taking that blue J and moving it around and tweaking it so that it moves and goes through that vacant land. The other one was move it 7 to 9 kilometres, which we'll look at in a minute. So this scenario, this particular curve is we're going to refer to as scenario 1 as we move through. But essentially what we did is we looked at the number of homes underneath that blue one, which is the existing RMPAR, and we found that there's 380 homes underneath that particular or that approach. And by moving this flight path slightly to the east, as we've done here, that will actually reduce down to 365 homes. Now, the thing that's important to pull out here is that that comes at a cost to additional track miles, that has a flow-on impact in the rest of the network. But it also means that we've reduced the number of homes that are overflown. What we've got to determine is whether the people that are living under that new proposal are happy to accept all of that noise that will come with that change. So this is one where we found it to be safe and feasible, and it'll progress for further assessment. But what we've really got to emphasise is it's something that will need community and industry consultation to progress. But on the face of it, it does look to reduce the impacts for the communities that are populated around that area, around the inlet there, and it does seem to offer some benefit overall, whilst still maintaining 2 approach flight paths, an RMP and an RNAV, which also allows us to share the noise potentially as well.
Okay, so I'll just
Did
go
anyone
to,
have any?
Yeah, I've got one from Sharon and one from Daniel, so I'll just go to Sharon first.
I agree with that, but you come back to the start of that J. Are you going to move, or are you still going to start your directional point from Bavu, or are you going to move Bavu as well, which will help myself and my neighbours? But if you leave the start of that J where it is now, you're not helping us at all. It's going to be worse.
Thanks, Sharon. In this particular suggestion that many people contributed to, there wasn't any request to move the starting point of the RMP. It was merely to move it and aim it at that vacant land that you can see there in the middle and bottom of those of that J.
But I think that's something.
Suggestion.
I was just going to say, Tim, I agree with this particular suggestion, but that's something we can note to have a look at as we progress it through the flight path change program. So one of the things we'll be doing when we give these safe and feasible alternatives to our flight path designers is getting them to maximise the benefit out of them. So it won't just be a literal, we're going to stick to this. We'll look to see where we can maximise any gain from it. But again, we'll come out to the community and have that discussion after we've done that work.
Absolutely. And
Sorry, we just got another question, Tim.
It's Glenn again. So if we ask the 15 houses that are going to be affected about whether they want to be there, how does that happen?
So that happens as part of the engagement that we'll do after we've done the proper design, the environmental assessment. We'll come out and do community engagement, and so we'll be contacting people that live in that area and encouraging them to be part of the engagement. So
that's great. So how are you going to do that? And is it in line with how we were informed before?
I'm not sure how you were informed before. I wasn't with. Okay, well, it won't be like that then. One of our challenges, we can't get rate data. We can't use rate data because we don't have access to it due to privacy regulations. What we can do is do letterbox drops. We can ask council to share information on our behalf. And we can put things out through SECLA, through the airport, through our noise complaint system. We can put ads in papers. Okay, well, we'll have to find another way to talk to people in Denali. How do you get your mail? You have a post office box, do you? Oh, okay. Post office, okay. Well, we can actually through Australia Post we can put notices in post office boxes, so that's something we can look at. So we've changed the way we do engagement compared to what you've had in the past. We do make every effort to try and contact people. We can't knock on every door. We physically can't go and knock on every door, but we will try as hard as we can to make sure people know. And that's something that you can. I mean, if you've got suggestions on how we can best make people aware of this, happy to take them, and we'll work with you on how we can best do that.
So can I just note that landowners don't have probably a post office box, and I can't understand why the councils wouldn't allow you to access their rates addresses. which would get to landowners, not just residents.
Yeah, unfortunately, under the privacy regulations, they can't give us that database. We can ask them to do a mail out on our behalf, but that's up to the councils. I don't know what the local council here would do. We can ask them that question, but we would rely on their cooperation on that. We can't demand they do it, and they will not give us their rate data. We're not allowed to have it under privacy legislation.
I think the ratepayers can demand that the council will allow that.
Well, if you can tell the council that we want them on board with this, yep.
Oh, thanks. It's Dave here. I'm just looking at the two figures there, and there seems to be an inconsistency between the rectangle and the 2 to 3 kilometre rectangle and the top figure, and the purple J and the bottom figure. So I guess my question is, which of those accurately represents the proposed change in the flight path for the RNPA star?
So I think you're feeling like it's a little bit further east than than the suggestion. So Tim, the rectangle at the top, the 2 to 3 kilometres, kind of comes over, I guess, the point, whereas the J is further east of the point, I think is the comment.
Yeah, thanks Donna, thanks Dave. When we had suggestions, people said move it east, move that particular flight path east. So the box on the top is just showing which particular flight path was referenced in the wording that the community gave us. They specifically said move the RMPAR for runway 30 in this instance, and they said, move it to the vacant land 2 to 3 kilometres east, and they then referenced that Connolly's Marsh and Primrose Sands. So all we've done here is essentially moved the existing procedure that they were putting in verbal comment in, and basically aiming it at that vacant land in a way that is the shortest way, so that we don't increase the track miles, so that it gets a fair shake and the communities. And so I guess the most representative one is the one on the bottom, which is essentially that indicative flight path based on our interpretation of what the community members have asked for. And if this was your suggestion and you don't feel it reflects that, then you can give us some feedback on that as part of the report. There's certainly several people that I think would identify with this particular interpretation that all sort of went into that theme. But the answer to your question is the bottom right, is how we've interpreted it.
Okay, another question?
Hi, it's David again. Just where that's moved to, one of the comments you made was it had a better noise sharing across communities, but from the flight paths you showed and the actual aircraft usage, there was a big hole around the airport itself, and concentration of aircraft further out. It seems that this is moving it more into the concentration of other aircraft and closer to the other two tracks shown on that chart there. So you're actually increasing it in further to the east and less to the west, which was previously overflown.
Yeah, so thanks Dave. The suggestions are not based on pre-2017. The suggestions are based on what's existing now and the final airspace design that's being flown, and then making suggestions for improvements to the design that we currently have. So the community are asking us to assess, is it a good idea to move it from where it is and it's overflying us? And many people in that community said, can you move it to that vacant land, and what would that look like? So that's exactly what this is doing. It's looking if it's safe and feasible to move that flight path to that vacant land, and then it's been assessed using the criteria as all of the other ones have, without any value judgment at this stage.
Okay, I've just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more questions.
It's Glenn again. Given that you're increasing the distance to the airport, is it therefore feasible to have that aircraft come in higher?
Yeah, in this case, it will be slightly higher where it crosses the coast, but the track miles are pretty similar. They're 3 to 4 nautical miles. So, and there is a knock-on impact that comes from this further back in the network. That's what the detailed assessment would do. So our flight path design team would then actually create a suitable and safe procedure and work out whether that could be delivered within the network, and then work out whether this allows us to be higher when we cross the coast or higher over those communities. As a general rule, you lose about 300 feet every nautical mile or thereabouts. Nigel, am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Tim. 300 feet per nautical mile is the best simple maths to apply to the situation.
So about 100 metres.
So as you can see with the naked eye there, where the blue path crosses the coast to where the purple or magenta path crosses the coast, if you were going to measure the line or the path to the runway, the purple one is a little bit higher when it crosses the coast, but it's not significant. To the naked eye there, I would put about 500 feet to 1,000 feet higher. So you're looking maybe 200 metres to 250 metres higher there over the coast.
Okay, we've got another question.
And the detail... Yeah, sorry.
There was another suggestion from the community, it might have been mine, that you move that exact line that you're talking about now, the J, 5 to 7 kilometres to the east. Now, you're telling us that that J is actually further to the east than the 2 to 3 kilometres. So would it not be beneficial, the 5 to 7 kilometres, to have a look at that, and then you can... Yeah, and then you can raise the level of your flights up and less impact on everyone.
Yeah, so that 5 to 7 is the next one that we're going to look at. So we'll get to that one in a minute, Tim, I think, because it's the next slide, yeah?
Yeah, and there's one on the Bava move as well. So Sharon's got several suggestions, and thank you, Sharon, and we look at those.
Okay, all right, John?
Yeah, John here. With this suggestion, you are moving dangerously close to the post-2017 approach line. Bear in mind also that Connolly's Marsh currently gets departures and the RNAV arrivals. Now you're talking about giving them all three. That's not noise sharing. Carlton River only gets arrivals. They get 0 departures. So there are some days where they get nothing. Whereas the people in Denali are getting either arrivals or departures every day.
Tim?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good observation, and that's one of the things that will be done as part of the detailed assessment. So one of the things that we try to avoid is putting overflights of departures and arrivals in the same space. And indeed, the existing design that was put forward tries to minimise that impact wherever possible. And one of the knock-on impacts of this is by moving that flight path that there may be an overlap with existing departures, and then we would look at that. And that's where that detailed assessment that this will progress to will pick that up. It will also do the detailed noise modelling and look at the number of times it's used a day, and that will then inform how we go to the community and say, this is a proposal that someone in the community has put forward, and as part of that, these are the facts that you need to know, and this is how it's going to impact you. And then that's where you get the feet on the ground actually telling us what they think about that. And we will also provide commentary on how that fits with our flight path design principles as part of that engagement.
Sharon's just got a follow-up to that, I think, and then there's 2 more questions over the other side.
John mentioned that some areas have 3 flight paths above them. That's exactly what myself and my neighbours have, and we'd like to see a little bit of relief.
Okay, so I guess, again, just reiterating that the whole process that we're going through now is to identify all the options that are safe and feasible. We then have to assess them properly and holistically. So just because we're seeing them here doesn't mean they will or won't be implemented. We're just saying this is a safe and feasible option. We get that, there will be competing interests across different localities in the community. We understand that, and what we've got to do is try to find the best outcome. So
this is the forum for feedback on these proposals, isn't it?
This is the forum for feedback, on the findings of our PIR. The forum for that will determine ultimately if any of these go through to being implemented will be when we do the engagement, when we have the detail on them. So, so this is really about if you don't believe it's safe and feasible, then we would knock it out. But if it is feasible, just because it moves noise where you don't want it, we won't knock it out. That could happen in the next phase.
So gauging by the feedback you get today will determine whether you knock any of these out. Is that correct?
They've all screened as safe and feasible. So at this stage, we would only knock them out if you raise something that says it's not safe and feasible. We've got to do the full assessment of them. We don't have enough information at this stage to say if the impact of the change would be unacceptable.
Don, Honour, we are not flight path designers. We have no idea whether they're safe or feasible. Why are we here if you are not expecting feedback from us on these proposals?
Yep, you can give us feedback on the proposals and we will take that on board. But there are other people who have put this forward and have said, Air Services, we would like this considered. And we've looked at it and we've said, yep, it's safe and feasible. So we are considering it to give recognition of the fact that somebody has asked us to consider it. So, and there will always be someone who won't like a particular option. There might be one that you've put forward that somebody else won't like, but we're not going to knock that out because somebody else doesn't like it. So our assessment that we do on this, the detailed assessment, will be the one that tells us, okay, is this too much of an impact on a new community? And that will be where the decision is made. But we're not going to say just because, you know, one or two people don't like an option or one or two people do like an option, that it's not realistic at this stage to knock it out. It's not respectful of those suggestions. So you're here so that we can explain the assessment. We're here so that you can hear how it is we've come up with these outcomes. If you disagree with us, certainly put a submission in. But we can't make a decision just because you don't like something. Okay, we're not here to discount something just because 1, 2, 10 people don't like it. Somebody's put it forward. We've assessed it as safe and feasible. So we have to move forward with it because that's what we've said we'll do through this PIR.
So what's today's trigger by numbers to convince you to completely reject one of the proposals?
There's no trigger today by numbers to reject a proposal. So we will note if you give us a submission to the report and you say we hate it and we've got 10,000 signatures to say we hate it, we will keep that on record, and when we do our environmental impact assessment, once we've got it designed, we'll give consideration to that. And when we come back out to engage, we'll say, look, during this phase we got 10,000 signatures saying they hated it. We've looked at it, it gives a benefit to this many people, and we'll engage based on that.
Yeah, pardon my ignorance. I actually thought that attending today would have some bearing on the outcome. Clearly it doesn't. It's all based on the written submission after this meeting.
No, we've got people recording what's being said in this meeting, so we will also take that forward into our consideration. So when Mark's team do the environmental assessment, they'll be aware of what's been said in this meeting, what the submissions are on the PIR report, and they'll give consideration to that when they're doing their assessment. But they'll also go through their normal process in terms of quantifying the impacts on the different communities, as well as the benefits that are provided.
Thanks, John.
I think it's also important. Sorry, I think it's also important to just add that if these ideas are going to be taken forward and if they are suitable, we've got to be respectful to the people that may be impacted by these changes that aren't in the room with us today. And that's what that next level or that next stage of consultation will do. We'll try to reach out to the people that may be impacted by this and consult them also. So your views are taken into account and they are valid. And if this then progresses through and is taken for community consultation, that's where we'll get the views of all of the people that are interested in the change.
So David?
Yeah, I'm glad you're going to consult the people that are going to be affected. But just to clarify, picking up on John's point, so today is not, the recommendations in the report won't change as a result of the consultation or suggestions that you're gathering at the moment?
As a result of today, probably not. We don't have enough people in the room. Like, I can't get a sense of, you know, how many people don't like this option based on 18 people being in a room. That would not be a good engagement decision. If we get... Right, okay. Well, it was the venue we could get that had the IT capability that would allow us to live stream. It was the best venue option for us. So we can't discount it based on this meeting. We'll be looking at the submissions we get post this meeting. Now, if we get a whole bunch of submissions that just go nope, 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 then we'll have to listen to that. But we will still do the investigation because the people who have put forward this idea have asked us to investigate it. We will still investigate it, and the decision making will come after we've done the consultation. So again, because we're investigating it doesn't mean we're implementing it. It just means that we've said it's worth investigating. Daniel?
Just going forward and looking at some of these suggestions as we come along, there's one that's on the east coast there. We've already had exhaustive consultation about that one, so can we just get rid of that now?
Okay, we'll get to
Daniel,
that one in a
I'd
moment.
like to get on to that.
Okay, so
I'd like to get onto those, but we've only got 40 minutes to get through the rest of these.
Yeah, so we've got a very quick question online, Tim, and then I'd like to get through the next few, and then maybe what we'll do, unless there's a major question, we'll try and get through all of them and then have questions at the end, because I think if we spend 40 minutes on one option, we'll never get through this. So.
Yeah, just a quick one. So Sebastian Online's just said there's currently a reserve for the endangered white-bellied sea eagle above Connolly's Marsh, as well as resident wedge-tailed eagles nearby. Won't this affect the eagles?
Okay, so that's something we'll look at through the environmental impact assessment. We do a Matters of National Environmental Significance review as part of our environmental assessment, and that's looked at as part of that. So again, at the moment, we're screening for safe and feasible. We haven't got into that level of detail. One more question, and then we'll move to the next one.
It's Susie. Can I just move up to the screen?
Yep.
I'd just like to... So I'm from Marion Bay, and I just want to reinforce, the impact if that would be shifted. So we already have now arrivals, what we have accepted as a sharing method of noise and visual impact. Then we had the departure dropped on us without consultation. What can we do? So that's 2, and now you maybe shifting this 2 to 3 kilometres, what will actually make this even worse for us.
Yeah, so I think that's consistent with maybe what John was saying before as well. So yep, we've noted that, and that's something that when we go through our environmental assessment, we'll give regard to. Next slide, please, Nigel. So I think this is the 5 to 7 kilometre one.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks, Donna. So in scenario 2, there were 2 themes. If you can't achieve a 2 to 3 kilometre shift of the RMP, could you put it in the location that goes between Connolly's Marsh and Dunalley? So we put it as close as we could, again, to try and make it work. And it was overlay this one. And this one hasn't been taken forward because it is safe and feasible. We do have an existing RNAV approach there. However, it doesn't allow us to separate the approach procedures, that RMP and the RNAV. It also does reduce slightly the number of dwellings from that 380 to 7. However, it does remove the distribution of noise because it puts all of their arrivals onto a single track that will be that magenta or cyan, that flight path there. Nigel, if you just want to go over it quickly. So what we found in the study is that the first suggestion, scenario 1, better achieves the suggestions that were made, like move the flight path to that vacant land 2 to 3 kilometres or 7 to 9. And this one doesn't quite achieve the same outcomes in quite as an elegant a way as the first one, which allows us to have 2 flight paths to maintain the RMP and the RNAV potentially. Also only improves the situation for 7 homes rather than all of them. And it also increases the track miles significantly when compared with the first one. So overall, this one was taken as, yes, safe and feasible, but not preferred.
Okay, next one.
Thanks. Okay, so we also had another suggestion to move that RMPAR start to the east and to move it over Dunalley, as you can see drawn there. The one on the top right is the community suggested alternative with the black line. In this case, they actually drew it for us, and then we've replicated that there. One of the things that we note here is that this would only capture the flight paths from certain geographical city pairs. It also adds complexity because this would give us 3 approaches, and this suggestion was specific around actually having a third one, so they want to split the flight path between the 3 in the suggestion. It would increase the track miles by at least 10 nautical miles, but also reduce that ability to have an RMPAR for the airlines to reduce their track miles and also have that predictability about how they're going to do their continuous descent. So this was not recommended to progress for further assessment because it does remove the RMPAR. It adds additional complexity for our controllers, and it also creates some noise exposure for communities that are not currently experiencing aircraft operations, which you can sort of draw your own conclusions on by looking at that image down there. So this one's not going to progress.
Okay, next slide.
Thanks, Nigel. Next one. Okay, we had another one to use runway 30 arrivals at night. So the community were pretty keen on saying, well, rather than using that blue flight path, use the yellow ones instead in the evening. So we had a look at this, and what we did observe in the PAR is that the RMPAR and the fixed visual approach have had significant use and are likely, as we grow in traffic levels, to get more use. So this is one where we looked at it and said, well, this does actually have an impact for community, and it can actually reduce the number of people underneath that RMPAR from being overflowed in those sensitive periods. Obviously, if you live near Bava, Sharon, that wouldn't necessarily give you the full benefit you were looking for. It would come at a big cost in terms of track miles and fuel burn, but it would share the noise around between that blue line and those yellow lines, especially in periods of, sensitive periods like it in the evening. So this is deemed to be safe and feasible, and we're recommending that we go forward with this. Of course, the caveat there is it will need to be assessed more, and we will need to do detailed community, engagement and industry engagement about when this would apply and what times of day or night it should be applied. Because there's very little traffic, for example, from 11 at night to 6 in the morning, but there is a significant body of traffic that occurs between 6 and 9 in the evening. So we definitely need to work with the community and industry to understand what exactly this means, but it is something that could share the noise around in those periods.
Okay, so I've just got a couple of quick questions on that, hopefully, Tim, so we can keep moving through, but John's first.
Yeah, John, Tim, you need to be really careful in this assessment because the dynamics of flights can change. What constitutes a small number of flights at a certain time of the day now could change in 5 years' time, and if you implement this, we could be stuck with it for a long time. So you shouldn't necessarily focus on what time the flights are occurring and the quantity of them, I think.
Okay, but
thanks.
I think the time has to...
I take that point.
Sorry, you go, Tim.
Yeah. Just very quickly, noise abatement procedures are specifically focused on sensitive times of day and putting in restrictions. So that's kind of what the exam question is when should this be used and at what times of day, and that's why the focus. The other thing that I'd say is the community member specifically mentioned a suggestion to restrict the use of this at particular times of day. So it's not really something that we can preclude as part of this assessment because it is a community suggested alternative. But I do take your point. It needs very careful community consultation to determine what's right for the whole of the community, and that's what would happen if this progresses.
Okay, Matt.
One question and one point. Maybe I've missed something, but how is this proposal different to the proposal that suggested moving at 7 to 12 kilometres east and arrivals?
Okay, very quickly, it's different in that these are the existing flight paths, and the community members that put this forward are asking us to use those flight paths at specific times. The previous one was about moving the RMPAR over the top of the RNAV and actually removing the RMP from that area. So this is distinct in that sense.
Sorry, just Matt's got a follow-on question. 1 second.
It was just more a comment, and it was to do with, the dots on the maps of houses and buildings, and there's continual reference to vacant land. Just need to consider that just because there's not a dot on the map doesn't mean that that's vacant land. Like, there's other uses for land and impacts that can happen just because the flight path doesn't appear to fly over 380 red dots versus 100 red dots, or I think that's well worth remembering when because you're going to take some of these to environmental assessments, and simply because it looks vacant, that's a terrible terminology to use. There are other impacts. It's not a house or a building.
Yep. Noted,
Thanks,
and
Matt.
that's certainly something that through the environmental assessment we'll be looking at in detail. So, yep. Okay, next one.
Matt, sorry, I'm using the exact language the community used there, so that's why I'm referring to it that way. That was in the wording if you look at the bottom. But yes, take your point. Thank you.
Okay, next one.
Okay, this one was to move the arrivals to the east coast and fly down, as you can see here. We put in our interpretation of the request here. This does actually add more complexity for us in that we have more sequencing and making sure that the aircraft that are coming down the existing route structure in green interface with that cyan one as well. It does reduce the flights for communities under the current stars. So for Brisbane and Sydney, they would use that cyan one rather than the green one. So this may give anyone living near Bava or that existing green route structure a little bit of respite, because some of the traffic would actually come and use a totally different path. It does overfly 5 dwellings and one accommodation place. It will be quite high compared with the flight paths in green, although they will still need to work back, and that's what our detailed assessment will look at, is what height they will be when they cross the coast. I think we covered some of that in the report. It does actually add quite a lot of track miles overall, and it would require an airspace volume change, which would subsequently require CASA approval. So this one is something that is safe and notionally feasible, but we need to do more investigation on to actually work out where an appropriate location is for starting the star, because they have to have a common joining point. And then what we would do is then validate that as part of our airspace change process.
Okay, I'll just go to Daniel, and then Susie has a question.
I'm just looking at the two diagrams, and they don't match. Like the purple goes in between Maria Island and mainland Tasmania, and that suggestion on the top is outside Maria Island. And the other point is we've already consulted on this option, and it was rejected unanimously. So why are we doing it again?
Okay, so the image on the top is because we knew exactly what you're saying, that we've consulted on this before and it has been looked at. So that's why that image is there for reference. The community suggestion actually asked us to draw that line that you see on the bottom right. That's what we've interpreted as the request. We are aware that this has been looked at before in community consultation, and that the stakeholder reference panel actually made had an agreement that it shouldn't be progressed. However, someone in the community has asked for this specifically to alleviate their impacts, and it is safe and notionally feasible, so we can't not progress it. And what we're saying is we'll do further investigation. And we also have to take the community suggestions that are coming through now in the true spirit in which they are meant, which is along the lines of how is the current airspace design working for you, and what do you want improved? And there have been people that have asked for this. So that's what we're assessing.
Okay, John's just got a question.
Tim, here is where I have a problem. Your slide says suggested star overflies 5 dwellings. Where in the bloody hell did you get that? It's overflying all of Denali. It'll be at 5,000 feet over Denali. It is vastly more than 5 dwellings. Not only that, the noise envelope is like an umbrella. You don't have to be directly under the line to be affected by noise. There would be hundreds of people affected by this. Even people in Murdunna would be affected by this. How in the hell did you arrive at 5 dwellings, Tim?
I agree with you, first of all. We need to do a more detailed assessment to determine where the noise actually will be. How we got to the 5, to answer your question, is we use that apples for apples approach that we described above, where you have the 1 kilometre buffer, right? And then we counted the homes within that 1 kilometre buffer. What we've not said anywhere is that that represents the full impact of that. What we've said is that this would need to go for detailed assessment with noise modelling and then the appropriate community consultation. So what we would do if we find that this is something that can continue, is we will do a detailed modelling. We will look at the aircraft that are flying it, the type, the time of day, and then we'll do the appropriate noise modelling and then look at the community impacts. But the 5 number that we're talking about is the apples for apples comparison between what you see in the green there and what you see in the cyan, using the latest data available to us on the homes and the or residential dwellings. So I think we're more or less on the same page.
Okay, we've got another question here.
Thanks, Dave, again. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I would hope that the modelling would take into account the fact that you'd be flying over water and the aircraft noise would be like a wave front hitting the entire coastline with everybody along that coastline copping it.
Yep, so that's something that we will try to consider. As we said, we don't have modelling software that looks at noise refraction off or reflection off water, but we'll look to see what we can do to try and understand what that looks like. Susie?
I'm just wondering, so as you all know, I'm at Marion Bay, and just general, so we get, we have arrivals, departures, we might have the night noise maybe, and we might have another route moved 2 to 3 kilometres closer to us potentially. We've never been previously overflown, and then now we're getting it in the front as well, coming noise and visual impact from over Maria, or close to Maria Island, Marion Bay, which is a major tourist asset. We just built 2 accommodation places, so the argument that, anyhow, it's not right. It's too much for never been previously overflown. That's not right.
Okay, so we'll take that on board as a comment, and yep, that's part of our assessment that we'll do moving forward. But we note that comment.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think this is reasonable to put this on the table to consider, because what you're not considering is the cost to the community of continually being consulted about these options. This was looked at in great detail 2 years ago. There was extensive community consultation and it was rejected. I don't see why, because one person said, I want to get that back on the table, we should have to go through that whole process again. Does this mean that every time there is a suggestion from the community that you're going to put everyone through a consultation process again? I just think it's not reasonable to force the community, particularly this community that has been, consulted to death since 2017, that we then have to come together yet again. I mean, people are tired. That's why you're not getting the engagement, because people are just over it. They don't trust you. They can't come to the casino on a Saturday morning. It's just absurd. They can't use the Engage website. People just aren't engaged with that in our area. I think this is an unreasonable... I accept the other suggestions. They could potentially alleviate some community concerns, so they should be considered. But this one, I just think given the amount of consultation that we've already had, putting it on the table again is completely unreasonable and is costing the community, and I don't think you're going to get a true measure of the impact of this one.
So I'll just respond to that. So we'll be going out to consult on all of these after we've done the EIA together. So we'll be consulting anyway. So if we go through this and the EIA says, okay, it's something that we should take to talk to the community, it will be done as part of that broader process. So we'll be consulting anyway. In terms of us, expecting the community to be consulted on this, we've been criticised in the past for not consulting. So that's exactly what we're trying to do now, is to consult so that whatever we come up with, noting we're not going to please everyone. We cannot, in this process, make everyone happy. But we're trying to strike a balance, and we're trying to find the best solution holistically for the community, and that does mean consulting. So, but we'll be doing it with all of these things coming through at once, so that we can we won't try to sort of wear you out, chipping away one change at a time.
This is John again. This isn't my point, but I'll comment on what you've just said. This is a threatening move to this community. This causes significant harm and threat to the people here. Anxiety, angst. I want to know, in no uncertain terms, when you generated that slide and you said it overflies 5 dwellings, is that an output from your definition of newly overflown?
No.
Where did that come from?
So as Tim said, all it is that we've taken the existing flight path and we've applied a 500-metre buffer on either side, and we've counted the homes under that 500-metre buffer, and we've done exactly the same thing with this proposal. So it gives you an apples with apples comparison of 1 kilometre on the existing and 1 kilometre on the proposed. When we do the detailed environmental impact assessment, that's when we look at the extent of impact and the number of properties that will experience a change.
What you've missed here, Donna, is this is presented as a persuasive document to sway people one way or another into agreeing with it, and that is false information.
That's certainly not the intent of the document. It's a representation. We've applied the same process to all of the changes, and potentially the changes that you support, we've applied exactly the same methodology. So it's just to give people a sense of what the change would be. It's not purporting to be the factual final outcome of any of the changes.
Yeah, and I think just adding to that, there's been several suggestions from different communities who experienced the impacts. Some of those communities further out have suggested very strongly that the communities near to the airport get more noise, and some of the other communities have suggested alternatives. We're treating them all fairly and putting them through the same assessment process in a neutral way. It's really important to call that out.
I'm just conscious we've got about 12 minutes to go, so just two more comments and we'll move on.
I understand all that, but you've produced a document and you've presented it online, and it's got significant errors in it which would persuade people into making the wrong decision. And you need to fix that, because this is consistent with the misleading information we've had at previous consultations.
Okay, so the intent is not to mislead or persuade. If there's anything in there that you believe is persuasive language, certainly point that out to us it's a picture. It's not persuading anyone. So, Matt, did you have a comment, or was it David? It was Matt.
Yeah, just quickly, just to reiterate David's point, I mean, this was consulted on in a lot of depth last time around and found not to be feasible. You know, where does it stop? So you're saying this will go forward into consultation, and in theory, this could be implemented as part of this process in 12 months. Flight path could happen. Is then there another consultation about the effect of this new flight path? Like, when do you stop? Like,
so
it's been rejected already.
So this could be rejected when we do the environmental assessment on it. It could be rejected at that point. Yep, and it's been put forward again. We need to assess it. If it doesn't stack up, it could be rejected. It could come out to consultation. It could be rejected again. But again, we have to give the suggestion respect. Somebody's put it forward, and we've said through this PIR we will consider all community suggested alternatives. So for us to then go, oh, accept that one, that person, if it was one of your suggestions and we went, oh, we'll consider all except yours, you would have rightfully be quite angry with us. So we can't do that. It's safe, notionally feasible, so it's got that notionally in front of it because it's not as clear-cut as some of the others. We're going to investigate it and see where it lands. So I'm going to have to move on. We've got 12 minutes to go and about 60 things still to get through. So next slide, please.
Thanks. So we had a suggestion to move the waypoint near Bava. So this essentially is a suggestion that looks at the impact of having all of the flight paths come through that point, or a lot of them. You can see there's one that comes in as just to the right there. And the suggestion was to move this a little bit over so that we could reduce the impact for the people living near that waypoint. This was found to add complexity because it changes the crossing points for the route structure further up, because there's a relationship between the height of the aircraft and how many feet it's lost over the course of getting to the airport, particularly for the arrivals from Melbourne. By moving this, we also looked at, well, how's this going to impact the total number of dwellings? So if we pick up that waypoint and move it, what we found is that the total number of homes are very similar. So you might have this impact removed for the people living near Bava, but that's just going to move that impact to other people who are going to receive exactly that same impact. And that's not, those areas are not overflown currently. So there's also newly overflown areas, which we keep hearing is really important to communities, that if you haven't experienced flights, it would be a little unfair to pick it up and put it over someone else. And then it was also found to increase the track miles by between 3 and 10 nautical miles, depending on where you were coming from the east coast or from the west or the northwest. So it was found to be safe and notionally feasible, but it wasn't recommended for progression for those reasons. And also because one of the other suggestions, which was to move the flight path to the east coast, would actually have a better outcome in terms of removing those impacts without impacting almost the same number of dwellings, 370 versus 380. So this is not recommended for progressing.
Okay, next.
Next slide. Okay, we also had some suggestions that have come up in the past, and the key distinction here between the ones that we've looked at in the past, and for example the East Coast, and this one is these were found to be unsafe, and that's because there were risks identified with the wind shear, turbulence, and terrain, and also the conflict that it would create between regular passenger transport and also the general aviation traffic, which are not working to the same standard. It would also then create a bit of a problem for the danger area and that training area where the aircraft need to go out and train. And one of the things that we work to is allowing access for all users of the airspace, so we'd have that additional disbenefit. So this was not going to progress for further assessment due to the safety risks. Thanks, Nige. Next one.
Next.
Okay, we had quite a few suggestions to move the non-jet SID, so that's the one that the turboprops fly, indicated on the top left, out east towards Primrose Sands and Connolly's Marsh. Some were to move it in that scenario 1 there, and the second one was scenario 2. Scenario 1 would increase the dwellings from 400 to 498, so it would actually increase the number of people that are being overflown, and it would also concentrate noise under areas where the RMPAR, which we've looked at in detail, currently are. So that touches on that point that we touched before. You shouldn't put arrivals and departures over the same place unless there's no other option. It also increases track miles, fuel burn for each flight. And scenario 2 reduces the number of dwellings from 400 to 44. So it's about using that same bit of vacant land that we looked at, but it does increase track miles and fuel burn as well. But the main point that we found here was that due to the requirement for that jet and that non-jet to be strategically separated from each other, this can't progress because we need to keep those two flights apart to get the safety by design that we put in the first place. So this will not progress.
Okay, next.
Next. Okay, we also had some suggestions to put the non-jet SID that we were just looking at to the west of the airport. Again, this falls into that same category of not meeting the safety and operational requirements because the aircraft are going to come into conflict with that terrain and also the separation aircraft, arriving aircraft coming over the top. Thanks, Nigel.
Move. Yep. Next one.
Okay, we also had a request to move the jet SID, so that's the one that goes a bit further to the south before turning over to the west of the airport. This one didn't meet the safety and operational compliance assessment either and won't progress. Next one. Yep. Again, we had several suggestions to move the jet SID to the west. Unfortunately, we looked at all of these scenarios, scenario 1, 2, and 3, but moving the jet departures to the west won't allow us to maintain that strategic separation between the departure flight tracks. So they don't meet the safety and operational compliance assessment, so they're not going to progress.
Okay, so sorry, David's got a question.
Look, it's probably a technical question, and I don't want to sort of hold things up. So, I mean, at the moment we're seeing that an approach surveillance service is being introduced into Hobart in March, which does, as I understand it, I'm not a designer, of course, but that seems to offer efficiencies, allowing tracks to be closer together, which is good for everyone, good for the industry, allows flights to move closer to the airport, is my understanding. Is there a way, and the other, I do have a question about the moving the jets onto not the non-jet SID, but close to the non-jet SID. I don't want to take up time, but is there a way, I'm just not satisfied with the way that's been explained. Is there a way we can have a conversation about that? Not right now, but just I just don't know if what we suggested is really being understood. Is there a way we can talk to Nigel or
David,
someone about this?
David, the key thing that we've assessed here is that if you move those jet departures or those non-jet ones, you need to maintain 5 nautical miles between those flight tracks to get the strategic and procedural separation that we require. So we've covered that ad nauseum in the report to make sure that it's well understood. We're certainly happy to take feedback on the PIR report, and if we need to add greater clarity to the assessment to better explain it, we're happy to take that on. But we aren't able to revisit the assessment because the suggestions were to reduce the separation between those flight tracks and we need to maintain the 5 nautical miles separation standard between those two flight tracks.
So, and Tim, just on David's first point about the change in surveillance operations, do we have clarity on what that would mean? Does it actually allow us to have less separation, or are we still, where are we at with that one?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thanks, David. We will need to maintain the 5 nautical mile separation between those two departures into the future.
So David's just said why.
Nigel, can I give it to you, or Anthony, if you'd like to provide some more comment?
Oh, Anthony's got his hand up here, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it is a surveillance approach, but there are limitations to it because the surveillance equipment being used, and it's also the large scale of airspace that the controllers will be looking at. So in the initial implementation, it'll certainly be left at 5 miles. It won't be reduced below that.
So for those online, initially it would be 5 miles, but what about in the future if it reduces?
I guess the possibility's there, but there's nothing concrete now that's going to change that in terms of equipment changes, etc., etc. So, yeah.
So it might be something that we could look at in the future if those standards change. But if we've got a 5 mile standard now, then we obviously can't go beyond that. But it's something that if standards change, we could always consider that.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's good to know. It can change in the future. But look, the other question was around looking at a second jet SID that is in the same space as the non-jet SID. And the answer's been given. We've had this conversation multiple times, and I don't want to labour over it, but it seems that you're interpreting that suggestion as the jets flying exactly on the non-jet SID track, which is not what we suggested. It was for them to fly in that same area.
We looked at all three, David. Sorry.
Can I answer this one,
all
Tim?
3 of those boxes. Yeah, go.
Yeah, Nigel?
Yeah, sure. So with the suggestion, if we want to move the jets, have a second jet SID, so this is my interpretation of your suggestion, David, so correct me if I'm wrong, is have a primary jet SID round about the area of the non-jet SID and maybe a bit wider to cater for a faster aircraft, meet design limitations and criteria. The issue we have with that is that yes, that jet SID will probably be flown 75% of the time unless there's a non-jet in the area that they need to put a jet on the longer departure for. The massive issue with safety, and that we've got numerous incidents at other locations that have had to be reported to the Australian Transport Safety Bureau and CASA, is if a common thing is done all the time, and these jets are always doing the short one, the one time that air traffic control need to put them on that long one, and say an RFDS or a Sharp non-jet has gone on that one and the jet is cleared via the other one, is the chance that the pilot still puts what's regular into his flight management system and the jet does what the pilot doesn't want it to and what air traffic control doesn't want it to. By only having one jet departure there, we wipe out that whole scenario altogether. And when you've got a situation there where the aircraft is sort of below an altitude, which air traffic control can fix the problem quickly, if you have a non-jet turning left there and that next jet goes and for some reason or another there's an error in the system and he turns left on that primary jet departure, you've got a separation scenario with a faster aircraft, more powerful, up the back of a slower preceding aircraft, and we try and avoid that situation in design all the time.
Okay, thanks for that. Daniel's just got a quick question.
Isn't there a capability in that scenario to have a vertical separation rather than a horizontal one? And also, if you've got increased surveillance, why can't you put the light aircraft to the west, given that all the Cambridge light aircraft fly out there? So it is possible that light aircraft can fly out the west.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things there. The one, the suggestion on the latter part of that was around something to the west, and it doesn't relate to the jet departures going here, unless I misinterpreted that. But what we need to say here is that we need to keep the 5 nautical mile separation between jet and the non-jet departure in place to provide procedural separation for this airspace. That's really important.
There's just a clarification here, Tim. I'll just get the clarification, Daniel, to clarify what he meant, and then Nigel, if you can jump in.
I was meaning with the increased surveillance that you have, that the non-jet, all the non-jets can go to the west, and then there's only the one jet in that location.
So that's been assessed separately. Sorry, Nige. We did assess the non-jets going to the west, and it was found to be unsafe and unfeasible because of the terrain and the turbulence. That's been assessed. Maybe you can just go back one slide. Yeah.
Yep, so Nigel, you jump in.
So the non-jets you would see going to the west of the airport are a lot of the time probably operating out of Cambridge, and probably non-jets such as Cessnas and small aircraft that are VFR and departing visually. They're allowed to do that. When it comes to aircraft like the RFDS and Sharp, they are instrument flight rules aircraft, so they're flying, and our procedures require them to put them on SIDS because it's safe for their operation. We cannot, to our design criteria, and that ridge line just to the west, sort of between Hobart Airport and the bay and the Derwent River on the other side, there's a bit of a ridge line. We cannot meet design requirements with a non-jet SID that goes to the west, where the buffers and sort of primary protection area that has to happen for the possible track of that aircraft, where it's contained within controlled airspace and doesn't touch the danger area, while also not doing anything with that terrain. So we can't actually design a SID for jets or non-jets to the west and keep it inside controlled airspace and meet safety. CASA won't sign off on it. It just won't happen.
And the vertical separation of the jet and non-jets to the on this current scenario?
Yeah, so vertical separation on departure, if you have a non-jet going out first, it does not climb as fast as a jet. To get vertical separation with following departures requires very complex procedures such as step climbs, where the aircraft leading basically gets told to climb at the fastest rate they can, and then every 1,000 feet they go through, the air traffic controller has to get a level readout from that pilot to be able to give the aircraft underneath 1,000 feet above that, below that reported level. With a jet behind a non-jet, they climb at about 1.5 to 1.8 times that rate, and to get vertical separation, you've got to have enough lateral in the first place, and the delay for the aircraft on the ground, it's just not safe to do it. You don't have enough. Vertical separation is more for airspace in en route, where you've got aircraft crossing at cruise, not down at levels below what we call the minimum safe altitude, which down in that area of Hobart is 3,800 feet. Controllers aren't allowed to tactically manage aircraft at that level and give different instructions if something goes wrong.
Okay. So what if the light aircraft were to stay lower? Can the non-jet stay lower and the jet climb above them?
The non-jet, if the non-jet goes out first, so we've got, let's use an example of a RFDS King Air departing via the non-jet SID. For a jet to follow that aircraft roughly on the same path, that non-jet would need to fly out. They need to plan to a minimum altitude going up to the north there, because you've got I think it's 5,000, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's somewhere in the 5,000s, the minimum safe altitude. So the minimum safe altitude they need to climb to is 6,000 feet. So you need to let that air traffic control needs to process that aircraft while not giving any restricted climb below 6,000 feet. If they hold it to 4,000 feet and let that go, the plane's going to go into an area where there's terrain further north, and there's certain criteria that air traffic control need to have that plane at a certain height. So if a non-jet has to get to 6,000 feet, and you need to wait for that aircraft to go, knowing that it's slower, and the air traffic controller then has to do the calculation and go, okay, what's the jet going to climb at? How far do I have to let that non-jet go while he's still climbing? And then depart the jet on the same path and basically give them a height requirement above that 6,000 feet well down the line. And the delay from that is a jet sitting on the ground for maybe 8 to 12 minutes, which is kind of unacceptable.
Okay.
Given that we...
Sorry, Nigel. Anthony was just going to jump in there as well.
Yeah, I think what you're suggesting with the vertical, with the non-jet staying low and the other one climbing above, that's actually what this is designed to do currently. So they turn early, the non-jet, to get 5 miles. We need to wait till we've got 5 miles before we can clear that jet to an unrestricted level. And essentially what that happens is basically you do have that jet climbing above, but you've still got to get that 5 miles separation to clear them through the existing level of the non-jet. So it's already set up to have them climb out and above the non-jet. That's already what it's set up to do. So.
Okay, I'm just conscious we're way over time here and we've still got a couple of options to get through. So just one quick question from David and then we'll have to move on.
Yeah, sorry everybody. Just a question on the radar. Would that help to reduce the distance flown on the smart track so that could move closer to the airport, just in terms of shrinking down to the 3 nautical mile? And also a question for Anthony, are things working well now? Do they need to change from an operational perspective?
Okay, so Nigel, the first question, are you able to respond to that while I walk to Anthony?
So that RMPAR approach, that can be that way with or without surveillance at all. It's designed to PANSOPS. If we didn't have any controlled airspace down there at all, or a tower, and us or another design company were to do an approach, it would look like that. The surveillance doesn't do anything. And even with Class C, if we were to have that, we still, like it's been previously mentioned, we still need 5 nautical miles. As for moving that RMP approach closer, you might be able to join final maybe half a mile closer, but that would also move the flight path a little bit towards Dodgers Ferry. The very minimum you get down to sort of joining the runway centre line from a curved approach is about 1.8 nautical miles, but because of the terrain in the Hobart, for that to happen and the aircraft to have a good minimum altitude that they don't have to go around by, the area has to be extremely flat. Because the aircraft is heading towards that terrain southwest of the run line to start with, that's taken into account in the procedural tolerances of that turn. And if you were to move that, I don't think you would be able to move it to 1.8 nautical miles on the centre line without affecting that minimum altitude aircraft have to go around at. I'm sorry if that sounds too technical.
Okay, and Anthony, are things going well at the moment?
Sounds like a leading question, David. Certainly, the current structure does facilitate, or has facilitated, our needs for the tower for the last couple of years. Things evolve, and so, of course, that always has the potential to change based on traffic changes, etc.
All right, next one, Tim, or Nigel, you've got the con.
I think, did we look at these already in detail?
Yeah, we've been through these ones, so that's...
Okay.
Yep.
So there's this one, which was a suggestion to have a jet SID over Frederick Henry Bay. So essentially you can see those arrows come out, the departing aircraft would make a turn and then climb up to 10,000 foot and then head back out over the airport. Unfortunately on this one, we couldn't get all the aircraft to actually achieve that outcome within their turn radius. And also when aircraft drop a wing, they need more power to actually achieve the same climb gradient. So this is stretching what aircraft can do, both in terms of what they can achieve in terms of the climb, but also getting that back over. So it wasn't found to be safe or feasible.
Okay, next one.
Great. We also had a suggestion to move the jet SID to the east coast. And this, again, we're just calling out, this would only be used by aircraft departing to Brisbane, Sydney and the east coast. It has similar track miles to the existing jet SID. It does increase our complexity because further up in the network as you get into the north, there's traffic coming down from the eastern seaboard in a clockwise fashion, and this is essentially going up into that flow of traffic, and that creates complexity for us to manage. It would reduce the number of dwellings using that like for like, 1 kilometre buffer from 15 to 4, but it would also increase, like the area of controlled airspace that we would need to get. So that would also be a factor. This wasn't recommended for progression because it is more complex, and also doesn't improve the noise scenario very, very much at all.
Okay, next one.
Okay, and then another one was, runway 12, so that's the one heading to the south, to turn northwest earlier. And again, this can't be, share or be close to the same, flight paths in terms of separation. We do need that 5 nautical miles, so it can't be moved west. And it didn't meet the safety and operational compliance assessment criteria that we put it through. So unfortunately, this one's not going to progress either.
Next.
Thanks, Nigel. We also had some suggestions for a curfew, and I guess it's really important that everyone understands that curfews aren't something that Air Services determines. We, connect people's safety to their world by providing air traffic control, and restrictions on the use are governed by the Commonwealth government. However, you could achieve some of the outcomes that a curfew would achieve by putting operational restrictions on through the preferred use of naps, and that's speaking to that point that we touched on before. We would need to look at the community suggested alternatives that look at how and when aircraft are allowed to use specific flight paths. That's something that will be progressed with the community, and we'll need to do very careful community consultation with to determine the times, the type of aircraft, the restrictions, when it's used, how it's used,
okay,
and what the exemptions are as well. Thanks, Nigel. Okay, and then we had several suggestions around the implementation of Class C airspace. We've covered this as part of the terms of reference, feedback and consultation. This is not in the scope of the PAR. It is something that Air Services is still committed to doing, but at the appropriate time when the traffic volumes dictate that it's necessary. The critical thing here is it wouldn't change the separation standard that we're currently applying in Hobart, and it wouldn't change the outcome of the assessments that we've done.
Next.
Thanks, Marshall. Okay, so a number of recommended actions came out of this. For future assessments, we'll look at that flight, 1 kilometre buffer and the sensitive site analysis, and see if we can come up with a way to take the altitude and the spread of tracks in that into account. What we're not trying to do is a full environment assessment with all the noise modelling for each suggested alternative that comes in. So we'll continue to use the apples with apples way of looking at it, but we'll look to see if we can make it a little bit more intuitive and a bit smarter. The other recommended action will be that we'll undertake further assessment of moving that RMPAR star 2 to 3 kilometres to the east. We'll look at the noise abatement procedure changes and come and consult the community a little bit more on that. And then we'll also undertake further investigation of the flight path change to move arrivals to the east coast over water, and the appropriate starting point, because that'll influence the starting point for that rest of the network structure as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Tim. I think what we might do, I know you've got some more slides there about the modelled noise and all of that. I think we'll skip that, and we've just got a couple of questions, and then I want to just quickly touch on the industry suggestions, and then we'll end. So I've got Sharon, John, and somebody else.
Could I ask a general question regarding noise sharing? Can you not extend the corridors? Some people have put this in so that planes are not always on the same track over the same people. Could they be extended over a corridor within that area?
Yeah, so that's, I think, I might get Nigel maybe to answer that, but I would think, Nigel, that's the RNP system isn't designed to spread, is that correct?
Correct. The way satellite navigation works is basically an aircraft tracking from a very pinpointed position over the ground, which is made up of a latitude, longitude, so some south number from the equator and an easter number. To make these positions simple for everyone, they're given five five letters for its name, and they track from line to line. Apart from the RMPAR, which is they do a sort of a radius to a circle joining the runway there. Every other track in the country is point to point. We can't make an aircraft, and it'd defy the point of why we do it to make it accurate. Is an aircraft sort of weaving around in a corridor. I think the algorithms and the IT side of thing, even from an airline point of view, I don't want to speak too much for them, but that would be extremely complicated.
Yeah, John here. Have I missed something? When I read the draft document the other day, there was a proposal for some new flight paths for Air New Zealand going across Norfolk Bay. Have you missed that, or?
So I just said that was what we're going to go into next.
We've just run short on time.
Yep, so can you just quickly flick, Tim, to the Air New Zealand ones, which is the one I said we go to quickly next. So can we just do a very quick high-level overview, and then we'll get a couple of questions, and then we will have to wrap up because we are over time.
Great, thanks, Donna. So, yeah, part of the PIR was also allowing the industry to come up with suggested improvements. What we've done here on the right-hand side, you can see there's that green line, which is the flight plan departure route. And then you can see the yellow one that we were able to deliver for the airline customers. And so as part of this, when Air New Zealand have been flying these tracks, they've found that they're burning a lot of fuel because they have to carry the fuel to actually fly that green route the whole way. And that creates a lot of inefficiency and cost for them. The other thing to pull out here is that the aircraft are turning right on that yellow line when they're above 20,000 foot. So what they've asked us to do, and they've suggested, is 2 different routes that allow them to fly a little bit more efficiently on the Great Circle towards Auckland. So we looked at a number of suggestions. One was to depart via the non-jet SID and put speed restrictions on it, and that's not something that we've been able to facilitate, as that's consistent with all of the other community suggested alternatives. And alternative 2 was to essentially fly that route there that comes down and then south. Now this one reduces the track miles by 6 nautical miles, so but it does increase the number of dwellings from 8 to 50 dwellings. Now the thing about this is that it's actually quite high up when that change in the structure occurs. It's about 12,000 foot when that turn occurs. So that's something that will need detailed noise modelling to be able to determine whether that's acceptable. And then the appropriate community consultation would go with this, as it would with any of the community ones.
Okay, and just quickly the next one.
Okay, we also had another suggestion for a departure flight path to on runway 12, that's to the south. And again, this has got the green, which is the current one, and then the interim route, which is the yellow departure route, and then the suggestions. We basically found that alternative 2 was safe and feasible and is recommended. It does reduce the track miles by about 53. It also reduces complexity. Now, this does have an interface, speaking to your question, John, with that clockwise flow of traffic that comes down the east coast. So this is where the traffic gets out and heads out and out of our airspace very quickly. So it does actually reduce the complexity that we have overall. And of course, it would fly over areas to the south there that are not currently overflown. So we would need to look very carefully at that as well as part of our detailed airspace assessment process.
Okay, John's just got a question on that, but you can, we'll keep progressing.
Are you seriously suggesting that only one property is overflown in that scenario? Seriously, you're going to be overflying Murdunna, Taranna, Eaglehawk Neck, all those communities that aren't over. You're not suggesting it's only one property, surely?
So again, I think we responded to that before. It's based on that 1 mile width of where it is. Yep. So, and again, that's what our detailed environmental assessment will pick up. So that's what our detailed assessment will pick up. When we look at it, if it says it's 500 properties, well, we've got a very different outcome. So, okay, next one, please.
Thanks. So there was also some suggestions to the arrival route from New Zealand, and again, the same sort of process. The green one there's the current one, and then we've got a suggested alternative that's been put forward, 1 and 2, and essentially alternative 1 is suggested for progression. Alternative 2 actually increases the complexity, and also the aircraft has to track over land for longer, which is generally not a good idea. So we're going to progress with alternative 1, and that'll go through the detailed assessment to determine any impacts. And it overflies a similar sort of number of homes, 18 compared to 21. So we'll need to look at that as well as the heights of the actual operation.
Okay,
Thanks,
is there another one there? Sharon's got a hand up. I just want to get through these, and then we'll do a last whip around of a few questions. We can go back to a slide if you want to refer to it, but... Okay, all right.
Okay.
Hang on just 1 minute. We'll get Sharon's question and then we'll go to the next slide and then we will try to wrap up.
I can't understand where you're saying that the accepted route is going to come in now. Where's that going to track from?
So firstly, it's not an accepted route, but it's a suggested route. But can you just explain where it's coming in, Nigel, with the pointer?
That comes in north of Maria Island. And sorry, I can't read the name of it. Taranna, is it where it crosses the coast near there? And it will cross the coast at about 11,000, 10,500 feet, and then come in and join the existing route network at either 8,000 feet for the ILS or 6,000 feet if it comes in on the RMPAR.
So,
is that near the RNP area that it joins, or?
It's the runway 12 RMP, so it's not the one at Bava. We're talking about runway 12 here, the one that comes in from the north when there's a southerly wind. Okay. So it'll come in over Richmond, that one.
Okay, all right. Can we move to the next slide, and then Susie's just got a question that we'll go to.
Great, thanks, Nigel. Thanks, Donna. So again, this has got the flight plan one, which is the green one there, and it's a new arrival to the north. We looked at three alternatives in this particular instance, and we found that the number of dwellings overflown with alternative 1 went from 363 to 2, and it had a reduction of 38 nautical miles, which is quite a bit of fuel burn per flight. So alternative 1 was found to be the one that we will progress. We also looked at alternative 2 and 3, and we found that those wouldn't meet our requirements in terms of the complex turns and the difficult in flying it, specifically if there's strong winds. And alternative 3 actually had quite a few track miles, but didn't really give us an improvement in terms of properties overflown using that same apples for apples assessment.
Yeah, so noting that 2 is a high level stab rather than a detailed assessment of the number of properties.
Yep.
Okay, so Susie just had a question.
So we've gone through all these community suggested alternatives, but where are actually Air Services improvements to the situation? Because I haven't heard that. We are not the professionals. That's all ideas, that's all good and needs assessing, but where are actual good improvements from Air Services side?
Yeah, so in terms of that, so when most of the the suggestions we've looked at are obviously community ones, as you've said, but when we've looked at them, our flight path designers have looked at where they can best put them. So if you use that first one as an example where they said 2 to 3 nautical miles to the east, our flight path designers have looked at that and they've gone, okay, it's actually this spot because we can get it here and we can do this. So they have looked at it in reviewing the submissions. They have also looked at it repeatedly since 2017 to look at what's the best design for this. The design that they have there now, our flight path designers believe is a good design. They're now looking at things they can do to improve it. So they're doing that through this process, but they're not, I guess, making wholesale changes themselves. They're looking at where the community want to see improvements, and as they do the design and as we go into the next stage in particular, they'll look at how they can then apply the knowledge they have to get optimum outcomes and to improve based on those areas that that people have raised as a concern.
Can I just add to that, Donna?
Yep.
If flight path design were sort of the KPIs we'd sort of look at in our system, and after implementation, say we put in a design and there were things we missed. And there would be all sorts of incidents reported to the ATSB and CASA, such as TCAS resolutions, loss of separations, loss of separation assurance. Since the 19th of November, when they went in, we haven't had any loss of separations with this flight path design system. We haven't had any issues in go-arounds. We haven't had any TCAS scenarios. There's been a few situations where aircraft that don't fly into Tasmania very often have sort of put the wrong star or wrong sit in, but our air traffic controllers have not made any sort of judgment errors with this. It's sort of, the statistics show us it's safer and less incidents than the 2017 and prior thereof flight paths.
Okay, are we at the end of the industry ones, Tim? Yep, okay. All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll start to wrap up now. So obviously the report has all of this in it. The opportunity for you to give us further feedback is now here. So read the report. You've got a little bit, hopefully you've got a bit more of an understanding of the thinking around some of these from the discussion today. Appreciate that, you know, not everybody will be happy with all of these. You can certainly tell us that in the feedback. But we will, you know, depending on what the feedback is that comes in, we'll then put an updated report out. As I said, track changes plus clean copy, so you can see if we have changed anything. And the ones that do go through, we've got this flight path change program that we'll be implementing where we do the detailed assessment to address particularly your point, John, about the number of houses. We will have that detail. It won't be a sort of a high-level assessment. It will be quite detailed. Some of the options may drop out during that environmental assessment because we look at it and go, no, it doesn't provide the benefit, or it's higher impact than we thought. Some may continue through, but then we will come back and consult with the community on it before making any decisions, and it will be a transparent process. If any of you have any suggestions for how we can best create awareness, particularly for those communities that we're looking at potentially shifting flight paths to, if you've got some suggestions, please include that in your feedback. You know how people communicate down here better than we do. We will certainly make every effort we can to create awareness, but as I said, you guys know how people get their information down here, so we'd appreciate your input to that. So thank you all very much for giving up your Saturday morning to come and spend this time with us. Can I just check before finishing if there's any final questions or something that you really need to ask? Yep, Matt?
Just a quick one on procedure. So when you go away and assess these, will the feedback that's been given on any of these options previously, and I'm thinking particularly the East Coast one, are you going to drag that already detailed feedback out in your next assessment, or do all the people that made a submission about that 2 years ago need to resubmit? Have you got all that on file still?
So we have that information, and we'll be considering that as part of the assessment. So if there, you know, to be honest, I haven't seen what's on file, but if that was, you know, consulted on a couple of years ago, we've got those records there. That will have to be considered as part of the environmental assessment because it's valid data that we hold on past community engagement. So we will drag that up. But again, we'll still, assuming it proceeds beyond environmental assessment, we'll still bring it out, and people, I would probably say it would be still wise to submit on it again if it gets that far. But yeah, we will certainly be aware of the fact that people have discounted that in the past. Alrighty, well, thank you. Oh, one more question, okay.
So you did touch on this, and hopefully it's a quick one, but it'd just be good to clarify with moving the RNP AR star to the east. You know, there were the two scenarios, 1 versus 2. Why, you know, scenario 1 better meets the objectives compared to scenario 2? It just kind of, there wasn't that much detail in the report.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can add a little bit on that very quickly. It's because that suggestion still allows us to maintain an arrival using an RNPAR and an RNAV, at least at a high level assessment. So it still gives you those two. It reduces the impact from 380 homes within that buffer down to 15. So that's another reason why it achieves the objective. And when you compare that with overlaying it on the RNAV, so you essentially land up going from 2 arrival flight paths, one that can give significant fuel burn reductions, to a single one that basically penalises everyone on that single flight path. The second downside is it concentrates all of the arrivals onto one single flight path, which again doesn't provide anyone any benefit if you live underneath it or you're near it. So those are the distinguishing factors between the two.
So
Can I just add on that, Tim? If we were to have an RMP and an RNAV in the same place, we would. There's no point even having the RMP. The whole point of the RMP is to turn a tighter final, and the additional thing of having separate tracks that provide that difference in arrival miles. Now, it's a tool for air traffic control to use for sequencing. So if they've got an aircraft coming down from Sydney and an aircraft coming down from Melbourne, and they're a dead heat at the runway based on their sort of flight projected times, what air traffic control can do is go, all right, you've got the RMP and you've got the RNAV, and they don't need to touch those aircraft tactically. It's an easy solve, and they can then apply their attention to elsewhere as well.
Okay, so we might just see if we need to expand that out a little more in the final report, just for that clarity. Okay, David's just got one last question, and then I'll close after this one.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just some of the recommendations are actually mutually exclusive. So how will they, for example, the noise abatement procedures, sending air traffic down the star, that doesn't sort of dovetail with an East Coast route. So how will that be handled?
Yep. So I'll have a go. Once we've done the detailed assessment of all of these, then if they interface with each other, then we'll consult the community on those ones that do progress to that final stage of consultation. Because if there's a trade-off or dependency between them, then we'll explore that once we've got more information about what those potential impacts are and how they interface, which we won't know until we've done the detailed work.
And then obviously after that, that's when we make the decision of which ones are implemented. But yeah, obviously if they don't work together, they won't all be implemented. So, all right, well, thank you so much for joining us, and no doubt we'll be seeing you all again soon. Look forward to getting your submissions, and thanks again for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys, online. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.